3G networks are going to come. The bandwidth is going to grow. Let's create something that's a digital living room for people. And they liked our idea. I was 24, and they said, look, all right, we'll give you $10 million. Why don't you guys come and build this here?
Wow.
Now, on the other side, they took 92% of the company. What am I doing? Like, I gave up a job. First, I gave up a job in investment banking, which was paying an obscene amount of money. You join a company where you have options worth $1 million. You give that up, and you get funded by someone who's giving you $10 million, and then you lose that. And you're like, oh my God, I mean, what am I doing?
But then you joined Interactive.
A role which was very vague. It said, be a part of launching businesses. Okay, sounds interesting. And our job was to look at what we owned as IAC and see what else we could build. And so we had just bought TripAdvisor at that time.
Wow.
And so TripAdvisor, we bought for $125 million, and it was 7 people. I don't see myself as an investor. I really see ourselves as investing is the way we get the opportunity to play the game of building.
How has that journey now transformed? Like over the last 11 or 12 years of being now a real fund manager, not what we would call managing a portfolio.
I think at the end of the day, when you're out pitching a story, you're talking about the opportunity, the dream, the possibilities. And I think ultimately that's what we're all about. We're all about dreaming. We're all about dreaming for, hey, how could this happen? Where could we go with this? Isn't it going to be amazing that the future is going to look like? Then we talked about all the inefficiencies that exist. How can we create something out of that? And that's exciting.
Well, hello and welcome to another, what is really going to be an amazing episode of Damani Talks. Today, we have someone with a very interesting background because, most of the people that we have interviewed on this show have usually been born in India. They've traveled the world and then they've come back to India and they're doing something very, very interesting. But what about people who were not born in India and actually chose India as their home? And today we've got a guest who's done it all. He's been a banker, he's been a founder, he's been a prolific investor. He's been involved in some of India's very early entrepreneurial journeys, some of the brands we all have seen on TV that we use in our daily lives. He's backed them all and he's seen it all, the good, bad, the ugly, and the awesome. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Sandeep of Lightbox Ventures onto our show. Sandeep, welcome.
Thank you. Wow, that's quite the intro. Thank you.
But because I think you've also had quite the background. I know that you weren't born in India, you were born in New Jersey, and you came to your first taste with India was at the age of 12?
Yeah, I think my parents actually were initially intending on moving. My father was going to move to Manila, and my parents said, I think rather than moving to the Philippines, why don't my mother and I move to India? So I spent my 7th grade summer in Bangalore at Bishop Cotton's.
Wow.
And coming from an American school, an American system, going to an Indian system was night and day. I mean, suddenly uniform mattered. I had no uniforms in the past. You have to wear the black shoes on this day, the white shoes on this day, and I would get it all wrong. So it was just a very shocking system. And then my father ended up getting transferred to Delhi, and I ended up going to the American school there. And that was a great experience. I mean, absolutely.
What was the work your father was doing?
He was with AT&T.
Oh,
so,
nice.
And it's interesting. Like I think that. So he was a first-generation immigrant to the U.S. He went with $200 in his pocket and said, I want to try to make a life. And his entrepreneurial journey was really working through AT&T for 26 years and came back, set up AT&T's office in India, and then and really facilitated some fantastic opportunities for me. But I think just that, having been around that experience of somebody who said, look, I'm going to go with nothing and just believe in what I can do and created something, I think was just really inspiring for me.
And it must have been a big shocker because obviously you think about Bangalore, it's probably about 30 years ago.
Yeah.
It's a very different Bangalore than the way we see it today.
Well, so first of all, I think the Bangalore that I went to then, I've been going back every summer as a kid and spend time with the grandparents and do all of that. But then to go there and live there, first, the biggest challenge was the difference in culture of the school. And my kids go to Cathedral today in Bombay, and they've grown up. Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Okay, so and they've loved it. And actually, it's when we had the kids, we had this discussion around Cathedral or American school. Their mother went to Cathedral, I went to the American school. And I sat back and I looked at it and I said, look, if they go to the American school, they'll have probably a very liberal education. I'll have to be the disciplinary. If you go to Cathedral, they'll have a very disciplined education. I get to be the fun parent.
Yeah.
And I think in general, that's worked out well. And I think they've adjusted well too. But for me, at that age, going to Bangalore and going to that school didn't work. But Delhi and the American school worked really well for me. And I would say the first year, my biggest adjustment was, and this is back in the 80s, no McDonald's and no MTV. And I think that was the biggest shock. But then once you get past that, you realize, my God, you have so much flexibility and freedom growing up in India. We grew up, I was in New Jersey, you're in the suburb, there was no Uber, none of that kind of stuff back then. So you're leashed to your parents to be able to take you anywhere. You're in Delhi, there's a car, there's a taxi, there's a city, you can get around anywhere you want. So it was a very good experience overall.
And then you moved back to the US to study.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll tell you another point there. My father had said, listen, if you are, so if you're going to go to college and you could get into college in India, in IIT through the foreign quota. He had done some research on this and said, it's a great school, you can go here. Why do you want to go to America? He said, if you really want to go, then you have to get into one of the top schools there. And my older son is going to college now, and the amount I've been involved, and his mother's been involved in his process to get into college, that was not at all the case back then. Yeah. And whether it was, I'm sure for you as well, I mean, I don't think my parents had really no clue what I was doing. And the process was a lot easier. Yeah. And I think, so therefore, I applied, I did get into Penn, and so I went to college and I went back to the US. So.
And then you spent some time working as well, because you had a stint in investment banking for a bit.
So I did an undergrad degree in engineering and business, and I think that was the start of just saying, I don't really know what I want to do. I want to do both of these things. And I felt that I was always intrigued by, and we were talking earlier about the new Whoop or the gadgets, and I'm probably I'm ready to buy any gadget anytime. I want to try it out. I want to see what's going to happen. And I think that was always what I felt was going to be interesting for me, but I didn't know what to do with that. And I think when you're in college, you kind of say, especially at a place like Penn, the only opportunities that seem to arrive are banking and consulting. And I was really interested in tech, but I didn't know what that really meant. It's been driven into your head that you have to do banking or consulting. So consulting seemed like you start a project, it would go on for 9 months. And that seemed like a really long time. Banking, you start a project, it would be maybe 2 months. So I was like, 2 months seems reasonable. You get to see a bunch of different things. And so I ended up getting a job at a company called DMG Technology Group, Deutsche Morgan Grenfeld, working for a gentleman by the name of Frank Quattrone. And Frank was one of the early tech bankers in the Valley. He raised a lot of money for Amazon, did Apple, anything that was happening in tech, Frank was kind of the architect behind it. Now, I signed up to work there, flew out to California to start, checked into this fancy corporate apartment that I couldn't afford, only getting it because the company's setting you up to get going. A friend of mine calls me and says, I think you should turn on the TV. And I turned it on. It says that Frank and the group leave DMG and join Credit Suisse.
Wow.
So I was like, okay. Now I'm sitting in an apartment. I've got a car. I have no idea what's going on. Do I have a job? And again, at that time, the whole, everyone wasn't sending WhatsApp messages, and none of this stuff was going on.
There was no WhatsApp.
There was no WhatsApp, right? So you're trying to figure out life. And so
ICQ is what.
yeah, but even cell phones were just getting going, right? This is 98, and so we got a call one day saying, if you happen to be free, come by this hotel at this time, and you might find some people there. So I was like, okay. So I went to this hotel at that time, and there was a desk for Credit Suisse saying, we're hiring. Are you interested? I said, yeah. They're like, okay, then here you go. And so sure enough, that's how it got started. So it all settled, and I got into banking to begin with. And it was a great experience. I mean, we worked with some really interesting entrepreneurs at a time when, we talk today about companies without profits going public. We were taking companies without revenue public. And so it was a very different time. And
eyeballs is how I used to measure it.
Yeah. I'll give you a way we looked at measuring the value of a company. So we were banking a company called Alta Vista. Okay. Alta Vista was an early search engine.
I remember using it.
Okay, there you go. So then a few other people will. But there was Excite, Lycos, Yahoo. And these guys, Alta Vista was trying to figure out the value of the company. And we said, all right, well, they don't have the same number of users. they don't have the same revenue, but we found a comp which was engineers to market cap. And we said, look, engineers are the force that drives the value of the business. So we ended up justifying the value of this company. And I think Compaq as a business ended up buying Alta Vista. But we justified it by saying, look at the number of engineers Yahoo has, look at their market cap, look at the number of engineers we have, therefore that should be our market cap.
Wow.
You get creative. I mean, and this kind of stuff worked. And I'll tell you, actually, that's honestly where storytelling, I learned a lot about storytelling and the value of storytelling. And I think that's something that, honestly, I think American education teaches you quite well.
And I think that's the one thing I loved about even living in the US is this, that you could be unabashedly selling anything. I mean, I did door-to-door sales, right? But I also remember, we would have kids show up at the door selling cookies or selling lemonade or something like that whenever on a Saturday or a Sunday, and it was okay. The parents were completely okay, and the parents would encourage, hey, go earn some pocket money this way, right? And I think it like you said, it taught them storytelling from a very young age, and I think that really was to me one of the key reasons why the US education or the US lifestyle was.
But then how did you get into selling stuff? Because that's also not a typical.
I actually walked into the wrong room. So let me
Really?
So I graduated about exactly 20 years ago. So May 21st, 2020 to May 21st, 2005. And I had actually gone for an interview for a startup based out of Dallas, Texas. That was in the energy space. So I was meeting with the CEO, and with the whole thing was set up by my senior, Samir. He's Iranian, not Indian, and he'd already got a job the previous year. So I go to see the CEO, but while I'm waiting, there's also some sales seminar happening for the same company where they have this outside sales group that is going to do door-to-door sales for them. And so I just happened to be there, and I saw this Indian guy right at this front, and he was very smartly dressed in a very fancy, nice suit, very, very much, like Harvey from Suits.
Yeah.
Basically, the Harvey from Suits was standing right there, but he was just brown and not white, right? And I just saw him like take 75, 80 people in the room and completely mesmerize them for the next 45 minutes. And he literally got them to do something like just this hand motion, and everyone had to do it this way. It was called the flat rate, and you had to keep it right here. I can still remember, it's just muscle memory. And I just saw him do that for like 45 minutes, and I was like, if I learned the skill of how to actually mesmerize 75 to 80 people in a room, I can do this multiple times a day, I could be a really rich man, right? That's all I have to do. And then so I asked Samir that, hey, who's this guy? He goes, well, he's the coolest Indian you'll ever meet. I said, no, bro, I'm the coolest Indian I've ever met. He goes, no, meet the guy. So I walked in, and Mike just took one look, and he goes, you sit right here, and you're working with me. And that was it. And I had no idea what I had signed up for. I had no idea that there was no base pay. It was completely, if you sell, you make money. If you don't
it was
sell,
entirely commission driven.
Completely commission driven. If you did not sell certain days, there would not even be a car to come pick you up. You had to walk back to the office. It was that intense, right?
And what were you selling?
Long-term power contracts, door to door. So in tech, I'll give a very simple example. It's actually now happening in India, where you can choose your poles and wires company remains the same. Just choose who you buy your power from. So in Texas, they had the power to choose. It was .org. There was a website. I think it's still live. And there was about 100 different power companies. So you could literally just choose, hey, I want a fixed rate. I want green energy. Do I want a nightly fixed rate? You could literally just manage your power the way you manage anything in life.
And so you were selling consumers on the idea of you pick your power. And so you had to
ring it with us.
And you had to ring the doorbell and explain all this to them.
And we had to do 100 door knocks a day.
As a guy coming from India, I mean, you felt like this was the right thing for you. You would, because I'm assuming you'd not sold a thing before door to door.
Nothing. I mean, besides selling myself maybe for a few dates here and there. But no, I had never sold anything before. I think I was very. If I go back and think about it, I was quite timid, very shy and I never thought I would ever have to sell anything in life, right? Because I came from a fourth generation family and stuff like that. But I felt that if I wanted to do something in business eventually, if I really wanted to make something out of myself, I had to learn how to articulate my thoughts
Yeah.
in a way that I convinced the other person. And I think I really got into, to me, selling and my major in economics, because I'm a huge economics buff, really just connected, right? Because economics is the science of how people choose, right? It's not just about money; it's about just the choose. And if you can figure out as a salesperson how to influence one choice over the other,
Yeah.
like I think my real breakthrough was we started working with a company called Suez. It's the world's largest power company. And Suez has a AAA rated balance sheet. Even today, I think it's got $250 billion worth of assets across the world. It's got a presence in 185 countries plus. It's called ENGIE. Their product was actually 20% more expensive than your current option
For power.
for power. But they would lock it in for 5 years. The price would not go up for 5 years. How do you convince someone that, hey, you're paying $1,000 a month right now for your energy, for your small restaurant?
It's $1,250.
It's going to be $1,200.
Yeah.
And you're going to love it.
Yeah.
And you really want to.
And you
refer
sold
people.
that product.
We sold that product. It took me a month to figure out how to sell it, but then we built an entire, we said, listen, energy is not an expense, it's an asset that you have to manage. And if you manage it correctly, you may have to pay a little bit more today,
But
you
over
will
time,
save a lot more in the long run.
total cost of ownership.
Total cost of and that's when I talk to founders, I said this is how you sell, bro. Like if you want to make lots of money, and we had the most lucrative contract as a company in the energy industry because Suez paid us all commissions, all upfront, no chargebacks. This is like that time of life,
Wow.
right? So we were making, I think at one point the company was making probably double-digit million profit every month. We have 500 sales agents, 100 people that were doing operations, 15
This is
offices.
like crypto.
Yeah, and then I saw it all crumble. So I think that there was a learning there. But nonetheless, I think that experience of doing that in the US and being able to go door to door and being able to see US from a very different angle. We always see the nice stories, the nice tall buildings, but you go outside that city about 100 miles out, and you'll see that there are no tall buildings anymore. Yeah. There is actual neighborhoods. There's people are working class people, and you get to know exactly what their issues are in life. I've been through trailer parks. I've knocked on doors at 5 a.m. in the morning. I've knocked as late as 11 p.m. at night. 12. In fact, my latest, one of my sales was at 12:30 a.m. at night. It was a complete cold call. I just walked into a gas station. We were doing some sort of a sales incentive. Walked into a gas station at 12:30 at night. And if I got that sale, I would get I think it was a $2,000 bonus.
It sounds like one of those fraternity hazing things that you have to go through in life.
We're a cult, I think. There's about 20 of us that are still in Connect from back in that time. And whenever we meet, I think the level of respect we have for each other, because we used to recruit 50,000 people used to apply for a job in a year. 5,000 would hit the field, and we would have 50 people at the end of the year. The attrition rate was insane because it's not an easy job. Getting yelled at, chased out of houses. I've had dogs run up behind me. I've had, in Texas you don't have mosquitoes, you have mosquitoes. They're big, they're massive, right? I've had once I've had a knife pulled out on me, but it was I really was in the wrong neighborhood, but but overall it was a great experience.
That makes India look easy.
I think after it definitely tones you down. That why when people say US is itna acha hai, I said US acha hai, but please let's not kid ourselves. There is also really not so good part of it's like if you go to Malabar Hills and say India, that is India.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think Malabar Hills is India, right? There's a whole India that lives outside of Malabar Hill. But nonetheless, let's come back to your story. But you also became an entrepreneur at the same time. I think you've spoken about that you had a digital music startup at the age of 24, and you ran that for 18 months.
So
there's an entire story about how you also got unemployed. Is what?
So it was. I think when you're in the Valley in the late 90s. So first of all, I think I got there a little late, and I squarely blame my parents for not having had me 2 years earlier. So I would have been there earlier. I would have been a part of the building of the companies and all that. But so when you're there, you're working with entrepreneurs. You see these young guys taking companies public, and I'm sure later on we'll talk a little bit about venture and what goes on in that world. But you kind of realize that companies were going public at a very early stage. Entrepreneurs were quite young, and like, wait, I want to be in that journey. And so I actually left banking first and joined one of the companies we taken public, and I did M&A there. So this was a company that had an inflated stock price, and this was the other amazing thing. I think it was 99, late 99. I left. I joined this company. They gave me some stock options. I think in 3 months, my unvested stock was worth $1 million.
Wow.
And I was like, this is amazing. And so at that point in time, you would just think that at that point in time, just sit quietly for 4 years, you cash out, and you'll do well. What did I do? 4 months later, I decided, you know what, I'm going to leave. I'm going to start my own company. And so, you know, you're young, you want to take chances. And I think that's actually the great thing about youth. You have
So
no
you gave up
responsibility.
$1 million worth of unvested stock options.
Yeah, I mean, it was unvested. At the end of the day, the same way it went up, it came crashing down, so it didn't really matter. But I didn't know that at that point. I would literally walked away from it. And I because a friend of mine and I, well, first of all, at that company doing M&A, learned a lot about how not to do M&A. And these guys decided that, look, it's gonna look good. And I think it's a very different dynamic of how US companies are run and managed versus Indian companies. And Indian promoter-driven public companies aren't as fixated on the stock price, and therefore aren't as fixated on the story that you have to tell to the market about what that stock might do in the future. US companies, meanwhile, are all about the story. And as much as we talked about selling and the importance of selling, I mean, people have ingrained that into their minds that you have to sell the story. And I mean, there's often this idea of fake it till you make it, and you know they'll keep kind of creating this
sales, fake it till you make it,
right? So you keep creating this, and unfortunately, that's I think how a lot of companies were built there as well. And so, anyways, this company bought 2 businesses. There was no buy-in from the functional teams that had to run it. They were in the Bay Area, so the company was in the East Bay. One of the other companies that was acquired was in the South Bay. Another one was in San Francisco. So it was just no one wanted to drive. And you realize that basic things in life get in the way of. Like nobody wanted to drive 50 minutes or an hour and a half every day to go down and meet them. So the acquisitions just failed. But anyways, that was kind of happening. But meanwhile, a friend of mine and I started talking about an idea. And he was in New York. I was in San Francisco. And we said, look, 3G networks are going to come. The bandwidth is going to grow. Let's create something that's a digital living room for people where you can access your music, your videos, your pictures, and it'll all be available. And there was no cloud at that time. It'll all be virtually available is what we said. And this was the time of Napster and MP3.com. And so the record labels were suing the hell out of everyone. I was running my own little server at home. I'd managed to get an Ethernet connection at home. So I was able to, I found some software and I was able to access my music, which I had. So people aren't even going to know this stuff. You have CDs. CDs were these things that you put in these drives. And,
before DVDs.
But you could rip them or record them. And so what we did is, so I created my own server with my music, and then I'd access it from the office and say, hey, we could do this for everybody, and we could kind of create this. And so my friend figured out that each CD had a unique ID, which basically meant the number of tracks and the length of each track would tell you what that CD was. Besides that, there was no other identifying information. So if we could read that, I could then give you access to this central copy of it because I could authenticate that you owned it. So if you had bought, an example I used to give then was Pearl Jam as a CD. You bought the Pearl Jam 10 album. You put in your CD-ROM in your computer. I could tell you that, yes, authenticate that you own it and give you access to the gold copy. And so with that idea, we said, look, the record labels could then get paid. People wouldn't have to do all this pirating and all this would happen. Sony at the time decided, this whole internet thing is interesting. Incubators were going public. There were a couple that had gone public. I'm forgetting their names. And so they said, we're going to set up an incubator. And they liked our idea. I was 24. And they said, look, all right, we'll give you $10 million. Why don't you guys come and build this here?
Wow.
Now, on the other side, they took 92% of the company. So we had no idea about anything. We're like, great, we get $10 million and we get to build what we want. And so, and it actually was an amazing opportunity. We came in.
It sounds very logically right for that period.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, look, and again, think about it this way. Sony owned music, pictures, electronics.
Yeah.
I was sitting there saying, look, we could build this out, and essentially they should have been what iTunes was with Apple.
Yeah.
And again, at 24, suddenly we're having meetings with, I mean, the CEO of Sony US. We're trying to convince Sony Electronics to integrate stuff into their, what was it called? They had a Walkman. It was a digital Walkman. But at that time, the iPod hadn't even come out yet. So it was a really unique, great opportunity. And again, I guess for someone at that age, I was very appreciative of the fact that I did a lot of jobs in my first 5 years of work, which wasn't necessarily, I think, the most stabilizing thing in the world. But it was really useful to help understand what I liked, what I didn't like, what I thought I was good at. And so this was one of those where the entrepreneurial kind of bug kind of finally got to me. And I understood, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to build stuff. I want to be around this opportunity. Now, ultimately, the bubble burst. Sony shut down the incubator. We never launched the product because we could never come to rates with the record labels that made any sense. And so all of that just became its own mess. And I also understood from that, if you become a big enough problem, then people will keep funding it, which we didn't become a big enough problem.
I see.
And that was another thought. And I'm not sure what to make of that. And I'm not sure if that's the right answer, because we did the right thing by preserving capital, the wrong thing by from the standpoint of extending the life of the company. But I think we did the right thing because we could have accepted the rates that the record labels were offering. And they were offering rates that the business model would be like, what's a good example? I mean, you could say today what's happening in e-commerce or quick commerce where you question, will this economic model ever work?
Yep.
They were offering rates that made our business look like that. And against the backdrop of piracy that was still rampant and working really well. So anyways, we didn't do it. We shut down the business. And then I honestly had nothing else to do. There was no jobs in the Valley. There was nothing that anyone was interested in.
2001, 2002, I'm guessing?
Yeah, 2001. Yeah. End of 2000. End of 2000. I just gotten married. So again, that was a big thing. So suddenly here you are, you're married, you're living there, you have no job. It was tough. And you really begin to question your worth. You begin to question, what am I doing? Like I gave up a job. First, I gave up a job in investment banking, which was paying an obscene amount of money. I mean, you get that first bonus check that's equivalent to your your whole annual salary. You're making more money than you'd ever thought you were going to make. And you're like, wow. And then you give that up. You join a company where you have options worth $1 million. You give that up and you get funded by someone who's giving you $10 million. And then you lose that. And you're like, my God, I mean, what am I doing? And so it was a lot of self-doubt at that point. But then
you joined Interactive.
No, actually from there, what happened was I played a lot of basketball. And I didn't have anything else to do. And you kind of realize that when you're having these self-doubts as well, you're not in the best place to really think about other things. And so I started playing ball. I met some people while I was playing ball that were doing reverse auctions for the food industry. So they were running a company called EC Markets. And the premise was you run a business, and they're focused on the grocery industry. You run a grocery distribution business. Some of the indirect items that you have to buy are freight. You have to buy these pallets to move product around. You have to buy paper towels and paper napkins. So what can we do? We can aggregate the spend from a variety of people, run it through a reverse auction process, whereby if I was a supplier, I was supplying you, I was supplying, let's say, 10 units a month.
Yeah.
But if you come to me now with 500 units a month, maybe I'll supply it at a lower price.
Sort of Pinduoduo, but for businesses.
But for
restaurants. Right?
Yeah. And for anything in the food industry. So Ariba and Commerce One were big players providing software to do this, and we were providing the services around it. And so we kind of built this platform. And I knew nothing about any of this, but this guy said, look, they're looking for someone to manage the operations of this. Would you be interested? I was like, I got nothing else to do. I was really depressed at that time. I was like, let's go try it. And so the CEO of that company, slightly older gentleman, he decided that his life was better in Tahoe. And so he would kind of spend his time in Tahoe. I was managing, sort of bringing vendors onto the system to bid. And slowly he started giving me more and more responsibility. And I realized that, okay, essentially I became the COO of the business. I was like, I really don't like this whole world. Corrugated boxes, freight, and pallets aren't interesting to me. How to help people save money on buying this stuff isn't exciting to me. And running this business, which is where it seemed to be going for me, wasn't what I wanted to do. So then I one day happened to get an email from Wharton's executive MBA program saying they'd launched on the West Coast. And I said, all right, I'll go to the information session. It was on my walk home. Checked it out, and I said, okay, I guess this is a way out. Let me just see where this can go. So I literally took a GMAT 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, applied, got in, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to do this. And
Wow.
so I started Wharton's executive MBA program, and then I said, look, I really got to get out of this food business, this corrugated boxes, pallets. And so I started applying. The market was getting better. This was now 2003, 4. And IAC, Interactive Corp, had an opening for a role which was very vague. It said, be a part of launching businesses. Okay, sounds interesting. And IAC was a business that had been built by a gentleman by the name of Barry Diller. And Barry had kind of built this by aggregating up various businesses. And
Was he buying them or just making them from scratch?
so he's a media guy. Okay. And as US media guys, I think they just have amazing personality, and they just have this larger than life kind of presence and thought process around what they're going to do. And so he had actually started by buying a company called USA Networks.
Okay.
USA is a TV network. And from that, he realized that this internet thing was interesting. So then he bought a company called City Search, which was doing, think of it like Time Out as the magazine was, but for online, for different cities. So you could find out what's going on in the city. Then he bought Ticketmaster, and then he rebranded USA to USA Interactive. And so it became the TV network and these internet properties, or these transaction properties. And then he realized that, look, we don't really need the TV network anymore. So he sold USA, and he started buying more other internet businesses. So he bought Expedia, he bought Match, he bought Evite. So he bought a whole bunch of businesses.
30-40% of the internet at that
So he bought a lot of it. Right? Yeah. So he bought a lot of it, and he did an amazing job of kind of creating value by acquiring these assets, trying to find synergies. Didn't really care if he did or didn't, I guess. Spitting them out again, creating new entities out of them. So he was a great deal guy. And the guy that did his deals was this gentleman by the name of Dan Marriott. So Dan, I think, was just tired of buying companies and decided that he wanted to build something. So he told Barry that, listen, I'm leaving unless you kind of let me create this area where I can build stuff. And so he said, okay, let's do it. And so then Dan hired a bunch of us. And our job was to look at what we owned as IAC and see what else we could build. And so we had just bought TripAdvisor at that time.
Wow.
And so TripAdvisor, we bought for $125 million, and it was 7 people. And if I give you the story of how TripAdvisor started, that's a whole nother story. But we said, look, if they could do that, we should be able to advisor other things. And so then we got into retail. I mean, so the start of TripAdvisor, which I think is actually, for what it is today, for where it began, they had to build a repository of reviews. Now, when you're going to launch a review site and you don't have reviews, what do you do? So
they were user-generated reviews, right?
They just created reviews.
Oh, wow.
They just said, the system needs reviews. Okay. So they just stuck stuff in there to jumpstart it. And I'm granted now real people do it, but it was amazing. That was their hack. They were like, and that's the other thing you realize as an entrepreneur, I think you often feel like you have to act like the mature business that you think you're going to be. But there are so many things that people do at the beginning that have nothing to do with how the business ends up being.
Yeah.
And it's fine. And I think that understanding that, look, what you do at the start isn't going to necessarily have to be what the business is at the end or in the middle, and being comfortable with that and moving with it is really, really useful. And I find, actually, now that I've been an investor, that people, once they take money from us, feel like they've now grown up to an extent and act very different
they
than
forget the scrappiness that they have to continue with.
Exactly. And every one of these companies started with that kind of scrappiness. And so anyways, we looked at what TripAdvisor was arbitraging between the price at which you would get traffic from Google and the price at which you could sell it to Expedia, which is actually why we bought TripAdvisor, because Expedia, which we owned, was spending a lot of money with TripAdvisor. And we were like, look, we should just own this thing. It'll be cheaper. And it turned out to be right, and turned out to be a great business. But we ended up creating a business called gifts.com, which was basically trying to arbitrage traffic for people looking for gifting. And so I learned a lot about affiliate marketing, how to collect money from Amazon. And there were a lot of these affiliate networks that existed. And so anyway, we built that. And then I started to look at India. And this was 2004. And we said, look, we own all these properties. And at somewhere in the back of my head, we wanted to come back to India. And at some point, we said, look,
What did IAC stand for, by the way?
Interactive Corp.
Interactive Corp. Okay.
Yeah. So we, I wanted to be back in India, and we said, and I think we wanted to start a family in India, but I didn't have anything to do in India, and I think I felt sort of like I told you earlier, I was late getting to the party in the US. I didn't want to be late to the party in India, but what I forgot is India operates on Indian Standard Time, and so I got here way too early. So in 2004, I made the case to IAC.
But
Let's do
usually,
this.
Indian Standard Time means that you got here too late. But
I didn't account for Indian Standard Time. I got here early. India was operating on Indian Standard Time, and that was the issue. But yeah, I guess I think that drove me to say, look, I want to do something here. And I'll tell you honestly, I put together the plan for IAC to launch our businesses in India, and they said, look, we're not doing this building anymore. I think Barry had kind of had it. Dan had decided that he was going to move on and set up a fund of his own, which he did extremely well with, a fund called Stripes. And I was kind of stuck saying, okay, I got to find out what to do now. Because again,
you had already made it to India by that time.
No, I hadn't. I was looking at what to do. I was about to graduate from the MBA program.
Achha.
And I'd made this pitch to IC, and they said no. Then I started talking to some people, and I said, look, this kind of looks like a fund. Because it had said, we can build this online travel business, we can build this classified business, we can build this online, this TV shopping business, all assets that we owned. They're like, look, it looks like a fund. Why don't you talk to some people that would be interested in funds? So through a bunch of random introductions, I got connected to Ram Shriram. Ram was one of the early investors in Google and on the board of Google. He had sold a company called Junglee to Amazon, and he was one of the early people at Netscape. So he'd seen the internet grow up, and so someone said, you should talk to him. And I mean, good fortune. Ram was like very open to the conversation. So we had a discussion, and you talk about how, you would expect to be prepared for your moments in life where you're going to have these pitches. I was flying from Miami to Philadelphia, and I'd scheduled a time to talk to Ram. My flight got delayed. And so I called him and I said, listen, I'm sorry, my flight got delayed. I'm just in a cab on the way to my location. Can I call you in 20 minutes? He's like, well, you got me on the phone, so why don't we just talk? So I'm making this pitch for this fund idea to this guy who's just one of the visionaries around the internet in the Valley. And I'm literally sitting outside on the street because the cab arrived at where I needed to, and I didn't want to get off the phone, didn't want to lose the signal. And so, you go through all these, and you imagine yourself thinking that one of these biggest pitches is going to be, you're going to be well prepared, you're going to be sitting in the room, you're going to be this. And, it's just never that. I mean, you said you got your job by just walking into the wrong room.
Yeah.
I mean, that is life, right? And I think once you start to understand and appreciate that that's actually what's going to happen, the best laid plans that you have are irrelevant. So anyways.
No, I mean, this is such an amazing story, because I think I'm so glad we're doing this conversation in the May of the year, because this is the time when most people are graduating, right? And many of people that are very confused about, they want that perfect job. And they think this life is just going to be this simple path that you're going to just start from here, and at somewhere around 50, you're going to have everything laid out like the Joneses in the US. But it's never going to be. And I'm enjoying this conversation because it's going to be like what you're just saying. It's just going to be a bunch. It's just going to feel like you're one of those toy cars going from, hitting one wall, going to the other wall, and then hitting it back. But you have to just remember, just keep moving forward, right? Like once you get stuck in one place, that's where the problem starts.
Yeah, and I think once you get bogged down with the concern that, oh my God, it didn't work the way you thought.
Or my image, what happens to my image, right? That is just the killer bit, right? Like,
I mean, you must have had to swallow so much pride to knock on a door and get rejected so much,
shorts.
Right?
Can you imagine? I'm a college graduate with a double degree, economics and business administration. My dad is like, my dad would shudder to explain to his friends what his son was doing. Right? It's like, I have a son that does door-to-door sales. He wears shorts and he goes to work at 11 o'clock. He comes back at 11 p.m. and he's sweating the entire day, and he's walking around with a binder. I mean, And I tell people that I have no feeling in this knuckle at all. I can knock on anything. because I've knocked on so many doors. I literally have no feeling in this knuckle, and it's unbelievable. But it was such a dirty job to do. But I think my life would have been very different if I had taken the job at Stream Energy and not been a door-to-door sales guy for Stream Energy, because it would have just been two completely different paths.
But and I think it gave you the opportunity, I guess, to be okay with being different.
Yeah.
And I think actually from different comes the opportunity to do unique things, and that's like being comfortable with the idea of not following the path that's laid out. Like I think that entrepreneurs in general are crazy. I think as investors and entrepreneurs, we're pretty crazy as well.
Yeah, true.
So the minute
and
you
the fact that
realize
we
that,
get convince other people to
convince-
invest in our craziness.
yeah. And I mean, but the minute you accept that, and I think that these early experiences where you are not following the scripted path, or you're willing to take a chance at failing in a certain way, really allows you to, and especially if you think at some point in life you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to do something different. I think doing that early in life is really valuable, and learning that emotion, because it's an emotion, and I think feeling that.
And I think in many ways when you were talking about you had failures, right? Maybe not failures in the sense that hey things shut down, but failures like hey I made a decision and it was wrong, and the way you
I have
articulate
failures
it,
that shut down as well.
yeah. But the point being that you get so comfortable with failure
Yeah.
that you're willing to experiment more.
Yeah.
Like you know what if everything goes, if it doesn't work out, hey guess what, I'll try one more time. And I think
But actually, that's also when you fund a company, what you realize is that comfort with failure reduces. So for them, before they raise money, and often we're very early investors in businesses, as are you, I believe, and so those guys have been fine taking any risk in the world. Suddenly they got money, and like I said earlier, they feel like they've grown up. They also become less willing to move quickly, take that chance, make that shift, and that's unfortunate. And I think thinking about how to, and I haven't found the right answer to this yet. How do you preserve that? How do you ensure that?
and I think I think that's what we're both trying to solve at the moment, right? I think in our own ways. But because when you came back to India, I think you joined Sherpalo initially, right? To set up Sherpalo India Ventures. That's what you set up, and this is like 2005. I mean, we didn't even know what a term sheet was. Forget about like. 2005 was a very interesting time to be investing in venture in India. And
you were knocking on doors there, right?
Yeah, I just started knocking on doors. Yeah. In fact, a month from now, 20 years ago, is when I knocked on my first door. But what was that experience like? Because I'm sure when you came down here, there was you heard about the ICICIs of the world having some sort of funds, and mostly private equity was the key word, but you truly were talking about VC at the time.
Yeah. So I pitched Ram on the idea of a fund for India, and not even a fund. I pitched Ram on the idea of let's go build these businesses, and he was like, "Look, it sounds interesting. I don't know." And I connected him with Sanjeev at InfoEdge. I connected him with Vishal at India Games. I connected him with the founders of Cleartrip, and they all kind of told their stories, and I think he started to get intrigued by it.
And you hadn't funded any of these companies?
I hadn't funded any of them. I didn't have money. I had nothing in my life, right? I had a lot of interest and passion to try to figure something out, and therefore I was just finding people that were doing things here and saying, look, why don't we talk and let's see what happens. And quite honestly, nobody else was doing anything here at that point in any case, so everyone was very happy to talk. And so I think Ram then got intrigued enough. They said, look, I've done a lot of work with Kleiner Perkins over the years. Why don't we talk to them and see what they think? So in April of 2005, I flew out to California, walked into Kleiner's office, and they have this fishbowl kind of conference room, which is in the middle of their thing. And so it's very kind of intimidating because, here's Kleiner Perkins, one of the first venture funds in America. You're walking in there. And again, I was not a venture fanboy, so to speak. So I didn't know much about all this stuff, except I knew who a lot of these names were. And I was like, okay, wow. And so you go in there and you make a pitch about India, and I'm standing in front of there's a John Doerr and, all the guys that have been investing and creating all these businesses listening to you. And then I was like, okay. And I walked out and they said, listen, we think it's interesting, but rather than investing in a fund, why don't we just see what happens? Okay, now again, I'm 27, 28 at this point. I've never done anything in venture. I don't know anything about investing. And these guys have told me, listen, we don't know if we'll give you money to invest as a fund, but if you're ready to move to India, we're happy to pay you for a year to be there and we can see what happens.
Very interesting. Wow.
And I was like, okay. I said, okay, I'm in. I had nothing else going on. Why not? And my alternative, by the way, I was interviewing for 2 jobs. One was at Redif to be business development. The other was at Yahoo to do business development.
Wow.
And so if this didn't happen, I was going to be a biz dev guy at one of these places. And I didn't know the first
India
thing.
or
in India.
Okay.
'Cause I said I want to move back. I said I want to be here.
That was clear.
That was clear. I want to be here.
You're burning the bridges. That's
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
So
They're burning the ships. burning
that too.
Sorry, they're burning the ships. Edit that.
So I said, all right, fine. So I moved to India. And we just said, look, I don't know what's going to happen. I knew the guys at Cleartrip, spent some time with them, did a little bit more diligence on it and said, okay, I think this seems like a good opportunity. So went back to Ram & Kleiner. I said, guys, I think we should do this. And by the way, I'd moved to India. They sent me a sample term sheet, a sample diligence book. And that was my induction into venture capital. I didn't know anything else. We were talking about not knowing term sheets or anything. I didn't know anything about it either. Our first lawyers were Wilson Sonsini when we did the deal. So again, I didn't know anything about participating preferred, liquidation preference, any of this stuff. So I'm learning it all alongside the founders, alongside everybody else. And I mean, just an amazing amount of trust that the guys at Kleiner and Ram had in me that we figure it out. And I think that, I don't know if it was well placed or not, but it was, I navigated it. And I was fortunate, again, to have had that opportunity. And I guess we then made that first investment. After we made that investment, the founders at Cleartrip realized that they didn't have the right person in the role of CEO, and they actually asked me if I would take that role. Now again, I had not run a business in India. I didn't know anything about this, and I was like, to be an investor, I think you have to actually have built something, and you have to have been through the process of building a business. And I felt that, okay, this is probably a good idea. And so in December, I stepped on as the CEO of Cleartrip. Continued that role for 2 years. In parallel, kept investing for Ram & Kleiner. So
wow.
We were running 2 jobs at the same time. And I think that was probably the most intense period of my life.
And Kleiner also invested in Cleartrip?
So basically what was happening is we didn't set up a fund. We didn't set up an entity. So going back to that sort of starting point, I would email people from a Gmail ID and say, hey, my name's Sandeep. I represent Ram & Kleiner. Would you be open to meeting? So I met the guys at ICICI Ventures. I mean, the names, there were a handful, right? There was no, and then, I think Pinstorm, Mahesh was one of the companies that was doing something at that point. So there were not that many people doing that much. So it was very easy to meet the people that were out there. And I'd connected with Sanjeev, and then we ended up doing InfoEdge as a deal. And then we did a payment processing business called Paymate. And so you meet people who would meet people who introduce you to people, and then you just kind of did stuff. And we had no fund, so we had no amount of deals to do. We had no dedicated resource to do, and it was just me. So I had not hired anyone. The fact that I was CEO of Cleartrip gave me the opportunity to work in an office. Otherwise, I had no office space. And it was so it was very scrappy and entrepreneurial in that regard. And I think that was good because I did everything from building cap tables for the companies we were investing in to writing the diligence notes to negotiating the term sheets to going through the SHA and everything and every aspect of it. And so I think I know the business inside out because I lived every part of it.
This is all when things were physical. There was nothing digital at the time, right?
I'll give you how physical things were. We launched Cleartrip. We spent all this time, all this money, all this effort, launched the website, put an ad in the paper saying, buy tickets here at Cleartrip. The first sale we made was to a person who found the office, rang the doorbell, and said, I want to buy a ticket. I was like, I think we've missed the entire point of this business. So yeah, it was a strange time. I mean, and like I guess
so 2005, or rather 2006, 2008, you were running Cleartrip.
Yeah. And then I handed it back over to Stuart, who took on as a CEO, did a great job of it. He was one of the other founders. At that point in time, I think he focused a lot on the supply relationships for the early part, and then he stepped into this role, and he did a great job with the business from there. But it was very important to have gone through the experience of building a business to then be able to speak to people about it. And I would say that even for me today, the reason why we run a very small portfolio, concentrated portfolio, is I believe the only way I will stay relevant to founders going forward is if I continue to be at that depth of understanding as to what's going on in how to build businesses today. What was relevant for 2005-6 is very different than what's relevant today as we look at businesses.
Right,
And
that's
so
very true.
I think, and I enjoy that. And it's fine. I don't see myself as an investor. I really see ourselves as investing is the way we get the opportunity to play the game of building.
Yep.
It's sort of our entry fee into that thing, and then therefore you get the chance to ride alongside a bunch of people in the highs and lows of building a business. One of my friends was a co-founder of a company called Half.com that they sold to eBay, and this was back in again the late 90s. Did very well off that deal, and quite honestly, he was chilling, having a good time, and then he went ahead and again started a company actually in India. Funny enough, he started a company called Zoom In, which was a photo printing business.
Yep.
And we actually funded it as Sherpalo. And so I asked him once, I said, why are you going through this headache? And his comment to me was, look, the highs you get in the entrepreneurial journey cannot be replicated in anything else. He's like, it's because of the lows you live through in the entrepreneurial journey, which you can't get anywhere else either. So that reality, I think, is so true. Like, I think we're adrenaline junkies as well. In addition to being crazy, it's like you're in it for this kind of, let me go through this roller coaster, let me live this life of this. It doesn't always work in the context of the LPs you have to report to, because they don't necessarily want that. They want stability or straight linear growth and all that stuff. But I think the journey as an entrepreneur and the journey as an investor in early stage businesses is about that, and it is about that up and down.
I completely concur with that. In many ways, so I had a podcast with Ashish. Also, we talked about the fact, also that, it was great. Maybe when you make your first $10 million exit, I'm sure there was a high. Ashish Tulsian from Possessed, it's called RestoWorks now. And we were talking about, like when he first got his first $10,000 deal or $100,000, now he gets $1 million, deals, and he's like. But it's no longer the high. Just seems to be needs more hires, right? So it's like maybe the next one is like a $10 million deal, and then the next time when one of my guys comes and says that, hey, we got 10 million, I'm going to be like, okay, it's fine, great. What's next? Yeah. And I think in many ways that's what keeps happening to us as founders. We just keep chasing that next high, but just I think how we do it. Yeah, and ensuring that we don't kill ourselves doing it is really the.
But I think this is a country that offers that opportunity beyond belief, and I think that as much as I guess when I graduated, America was this land of opportunity and where you wanted to be and what you wanted to do. I think that if I look at it today, India with its, and we have this comment that we make that India is inefficiency at scale.
Yeah.
And I think that creates opportunity that's kind of unbounded. And everywhere we look, I mean, we were talking earlier today, where the lift takes time, where there's traffic outside, where this is there. I mean, you can find some problem. And I think you mentioned earlier that problem probably is being faced by 1% of the population, and it's big.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely right. And I think that's what's exciting. Not everything's venture backable. Not everything needs to be. Not everything is that. But it's opportunity to build cool stuff.
Yeah.
And you have, I think, a country that's on that upswing of aspiration, getting exposed to things in a different way. And all of that is just creates excitement. Yeah. And I think that's...
So when did Sherpalo then become an actual fund? When you raised Fund 1, what was...
Yeah, so Sherpalo... So it was funny. We were running this operation saying that, hey, we'll email people from a Gmail ID. And actually, it's funny. One of the people finally came to us and said, you guys have to stop doing this. You need to create a name, because otherwise people aren't going to keep taking you seriously. And even though you're deploying capital and all this. And so eventually Ram and I spoke, and he said, all right, look, we have to come up with a name for the entity. He's like, I've got my family office called Sherpalo. Let's just use that. And so Kleiner was like, yeah, we don't care. That's fine. So all we did was just stop using Gmail and set up Sherpalo as a name and kept doing what we were doing. And then eventually we took an office space. And then I think finally in 2010, I hired someone. Until then, we had our CFO, who is my CFO today, was working with us, and she was handling all the legal and kind of reporting related matters. And Bhavna, who's my assistant, who now kind of runs all of our operations, was there as well. And that was us. There was the three of us, and we were doing this. And then we hired one person as an associate finally. And then we realized that, okay, look, we have to think about what we're going to do long term here. And I started to realize that, look, I have to think about what I want to do. And Kleiner, I think, had gone from a 10-person organization, 10 partner organization to probably 40 partners at that time. So for them as an entity, India was kind of the afterthought of the afterthought. And so they weren't necessarily that as excited about what was going to happen. And India honestly hadn't delivered liquidity yet at the level to make it exciting.
In fact, in 2009, 10 was a year many of the private equity funds were underwater.
Yeah, it was a tough. I mean, if you go back and look at the whole thing, right? Financial crisis happened. Yeah. Everybody was questioning what was next, and nothing had delivered that J curve that we expected in India. And so, and then for Ram, meanwhile, Google had done extremely well. All he had to do was sit in his backyard, and he was very happy with how that was growing. And India, meanwhile, was questionable. The opportunity was there. Someone described to me India as a plane sitting on the runway waiting to take off, and it's been waiting forever. And so it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And I think there's a statement that someone says. We said this a lot. This time it's different.
Yeah.
And that's the most dangerous statement to make. And so we used to keep saying, this time is different. This time is different. This time is different. And eventually we were going to be right. And so I believe eventually we will be right. But it's taking longer and it's consuming more capital. And so Ram and Kleiner started to question what they wanted to do. I started to say, look, I really want to be here. And I decided at that point I had 2 kids. Life is very much here. I felt that, once you've started to establish your knowledge base in a certain area, I think it made more sense to continue to build on it. And so at that point, it had been about 5-7 years of me doing this. And I said, okay, look, I guess I have to institutionalize. And I didn't know what that really meant. Now, again, understand I'd never talked to an LP in my life except for Ram and Kleiner. I just barely understood how to run a fund, which was not even running a fund. It was investing money in businesses and kind of thinking about it. Yeah, deploy money, right? You weren't thinking about portfolio construction. We weren't thinking about exit horizons. We weren't thinking about, and even it's so funny. We used to get the fund audited, but no one really cared about what the audited number was because we were like, that's irrelevant. I mean, we know what the thing is worth. So whatever the auditor wants to say, let them say. Like today with actual institutional LPs, you care about this number, but at the same time, I wonder why we should care about the number because, and we've actually been very aggressive at marking down as opposed to marking up because I'm like, look, at the end of the day, I mean,
TVPI and DPI needs to be closer.
Yeah, I mean, how are you going to make this gap up over time, right? And so, anyways, I think that I then had to think about and understand what it meant to run a fund. And that's when in 2010, 11, I said, okay, I can't raise a fund on my own, apparently. So you have to have partners. You can't wake up and find partners on day one. So let's go start finding people I want to do it with. And so found the people who ended up becoming my partners for the fund at the beginning. One of them was a close friend of mine from school. He had started a company in Delhi, scaled it up, sold it to NIIT, was with NIIT for a while. And then he was thinking about what to do next. So just
when you say school, you mean UPenn or
no, American school in Delhi.
Okay.
So we know each other for a long time, and so we started talking. I said, "Look, what are you up to now?" He hadn't figured out what he wanted to do next. He was getting a little tired at NIIT, and so I said, "Okay, look, maybe we should try to do an investment together. See how we think about it." I had another friend in the U.S. who was a first corp dev guy at Google, and he had been sort of one of those sounding boards for me in life throughout. And so I spoke to him as well, and I said, "Look, he was actually the one who had connected me to Ram as connected me to a person who connected me to Ram. So he'd known my journey, and he was like, "Yeah, I think this could make sense." So we all had this meeting in Delhi. He flew in, and then the other guy who told you sold his company to half.
Yeah.
So the 4 of us sat down in Delhi, and we said, "Okay, look, why don't we make an investment or 2 and see what happens?" So we made 2 seed investments. One in a company called Imbibe, which is a test prep business, and the second in a company called Shop Clues. And so let's see how we work together. Let's go through the whole process, and it kind of worked well. We liked it. And around the same time, Ram started to say, "Look, I think we need to figure out how to get liquidity." And that meant that he wanted to sell a part of his thing. And I said, "Okay, well," and again, this is another complicated story. So I went to Singapore because I was on the board of InMobi. And while I was there, I met the guys at Temasek. And Temasek kept saying, "We want to write $50 million checks." So I said, "Look, why don't you guys just write a check across our portfolio?" They're like, "Actually, there are funds that do that. There are funds that do secondaries." I was like, "Really?" So then he connected me with Sunil at Adam Street. And so I talked to Sunil at Adam Street. And I said, "Look, you guys write checks across funds?" Like, yeah, we have a whole secondary practice. I was like, so what's secondaries? So he connected me to his guy in London,
Wow.
Penal. So I was like, oh. And then from there, I got connected to HarborVest. And this again, 2011, 12. At that time, there was one venture secondary deal that had been done globally, and it had been done by HarborVest. Venture was not a secondary product. And so the guy at HarborVest said, look, I think this is interesting. So suddenly I found myself going to Hong Kong every 6 weeks and meeting them, talking to them about this. So end of 2012, HarborVest said, look, we're ready to do a deal to buy a portion of Ram's holding in all of our companies, set up a new entity. Ram would roll over his portion into it. Kleiner, meanwhile, we didn't know what they wanted to do. And so we said, look, maybe they'll be interested, maybe they won't. Let's see. So December 28th or so, HarborVest called me back and said, look, we just looked at all the numbers for the quarter that just ended across the portfolio. They're amazing. Like, we're worried that this won't hold up. So we want to watch for one more quarter. So I was like, shit. We had a deal done. I thought we were ready to go. January 2013, Kleiner calls and says, you know what? We've decided we want to exit India. So I was like, oh, fantastic. I've got a buyer. They're like, okay. But I was like, but we didn't really run a process. It was just me calling people and learning about this. Like, you guys think we should run a process? And here again, this was probably one of the biggest mistakes I made. And I should have just said, look, we've got a deal. It's as good as it gets. Let's just move on. Anyways, we then had to find a banker, go through that whole thing, interviewed a bunch of bankers, signed up a banker, then go through a process, write a document, all this nonsense. It went on for almost another year.
Wow.
Just to get to a point of, again, HarborVest making the offer. But then we had 2 or 3 other offers. And I'm going to cut a long story short and say that we had 3 potential deals that failed each time for one reason or the other. And I can tell you a secondary is one of the most challenging things to do. And at that time, especially, today it's gotten better because there's more maturity in the market. People understand it.
I think data opacity has come down
Yeah.
quite a bit, because you can actually get a lot of data even without asking for it. So you know it's only the more finer metrics that are, because you can go to MC and get whatever you want at this point, right?
Yeah, but I think also people then didn't know how to price in the sense that they were like, and that was actually my first understanding of why my audited number on the books was important, because they were pricing at a discount to that or a premium to that. And I was like, wait, I've never even seen that number. And so suddenly I had to look at that number. And so anyways, we eventually got the deal done. We bought over 6 of the companies and that became Fund 1 for Lightbox. And then we raised $100 million.
So you
for
actually
Fund 2.
became so you created a fund in which eventually...
Yeah, so we spun out everything.
Okay.
I set up a new entity, Lightbox. We took over 6 of the companies. We exited the other 4 one way that we sold InfoEdge, our stake in InfoEdge. We sold our stake in Cleartrip. And so in general, and we actually didn't, Ram and Kleiner weren't willing to part with InMobi, to their credit. And so we didn't end up taking that into the fund. But yeah, so they kind of
These
Ram and
must have
Kleiner
been really good returns. I mean, these were all 2008 investments.
they did. I mean, that fund did very well.
Yeah.
So the 10 companies we invested in, at the time of us returning it to Ram and Kleiner, it was basically, let's say 2005 to 12. So call it 7 years, 8 years till 2013. 8 years. They got a 1x DPI and an 8x TVPI at that point in time, which since then, given how InMobi has grown in value, my guess is probably around 16 to 18x as a multiple
as
on
a
InMobi.
portfolio.
Yeah.
Wow.
And if we'd held...
And usually you were like, what were the sort of what are the sort of stakes that you were taking in the businesses?
Yeah, so it was a lot. Our first checks were usually in the $3 to $5 million range, and our ownership was usually between 30 and 40%.
Wow.
So yeah. So at one point in time, we owned 40% of InMobi.
That's amazing.
So I don't think today they do. They sold down at various points in different ways, but I mean, Cleartrip, we started with a 40% ownership.
I mean, these were like almost private equity style ownerships, right? In a VC.
And if you ask me, I think that is really what the opportunity set looks like in India. I'll give you a couple of reasons why. Because the number of 10 billion plus outcome opportunities in India is limited. So your outcome range is likely between 500 million and 2 billion in that zone. Okay.
You took 5 companies. You had 10 companies when you were at Shapalo, and you said 5 you took into uh,
Lightbox
Lightbox 1,
Yep.
and the other 5 were exited.
Exited or left behind with Raman Kleiner.
Okay.
So yeah, so we brought these in, and look, there were two parts of it. One, we had to raise money for a blind pool, which was fun too for us, and we had to figure out what to do with the existing assets. So the intent was more to settle the assets that I'd invested in, whether we took them, someone else took them, whatever happened was more. I know Raman Kleiner didn't want to manage them, so they were going to manage InMobi. They were happy with that because it became more of a global company. But the other assets in India, they were like, look, somebody's got to deal with this, and so figure it out. And so therefore, that's where that whole journey of secondaries started, and we got through this whole universe. And I'll tell you, we started by saying the bankers presented this idea of a staple deal. We'll get you the secondary done, and the people that buy the secondary will give you money for a new fund. I was like, sounds brilliant, great. One set of people to talk to. Then you start to realize the guys that want to do secondaries don't really like blind pool because they feel like they're getting a discount in the secondary, but in the blind pool, there's no discount. So then you're saying, okay, fine, that's not going to work. So we banged our head on that problem for a while and then realized that we needed to have 2 separate conversations. And when we had the conversations for the blind pool, funnily enough, we ended up getting our commitments for the blind pool before we figured out what to do with the secondary. So this was a really awkward situation. So I had our first anchor LP, and all our capital came from outside of India. We didn't even know who to talk to in India. And again, you have to remember, I had not spoken to an LP in my life. The only LPs I spoke to were people that would show up in India, seek us out, and say, hey, we want to know what's going on here. And they felt we were kind of an uninterested party because we weren't asking for money. We didn't care about positioning anything. We just kind of talk about what was going on. So through that, I started to connect to other people and find other people. And we never hired a placement agent. We never did any of this stuff. We just said, okay, let's start. And I remember that process. I did 220 meetings to raise the fund. And this was anybody with a pulse and have an interest in India, I would go talk to them. And it was, again, I think you only learn stuff when you do it yourself. Yeah. And I think I learned the entire process of setting up a data room, understanding what LPs need to hear, want to hear, understanding that there are certain boxes that need to be ticked in a certain way that give them the comfort, and also understanding that, look, I guess we had a very different approach to it. We went with the idea that, look, we're going to run a concentrated portfolio. I had invested over the course of 8 years, we invested in 10 companies, $80 million. And we said that, look, I like this idea. Invest in a handful of businesses. That's what's interesting to me. Deploying capital is not interesting to me. Engaging in businesses is interesting to me. So that's what I want to do more of. But venture as a strategy tends to be one that is more driven off of the idea of investing in a lot of businesses, and you don't know which ones will succeed, but double down when you see traction. And that's kind of how the model's been built. But again, my argument is that model was built in the US for a US market, and a US market at a time that was driven on, and actually I learned all my understanding of venture investing from Raman Kleiner. John Doerr used to make a presentation where he would talk about there are 4 risks in venture capital: technology risk, business model risk, team risk, and market risk. And his argument was, we're taking technology risk, we're not taking market risk. We know the market exists. Are you building a better mousetrap for the market? And therefore, that's what they were looking for. But the reality is mousetraps are unpredictable. So you don't know if this mousetrap's going to work or that one's going to work or that one's going to work. So you invest in a bunch of them. And as some start to work, you then go. Right? But in India, you're not investing in mousetraps. Here, the technology to figure out how to do a subscription model for furniture rental isn't rocket science. Is the market ready or not is the question. The technology for doing custom shirt production like Bombay Shirt Company isn't rocket science. Is there not enough of a market for it? So you're making bets on the market here and taking market risk much more so. So in my view, at least, we were saying that, look, we don't have to bet on new mousetraps. We can say, look, we can assess the market and decide if we're in a big enough space. It might be a little bit like this, a little bit like that, but the market's big. And you're taking a bet on, is the market moving in a direction? So very different than the US, in my opinion. And therefore, we said, look, we can run this as a concentrated portfolio. And we can keep doing what we've liked doing because we enjoy, and everybody I brought in were people that enjoyed being operators, not interested in being investors. And actually, it's been one of the more difficult challenges over time. As we become known as a venture fund, you start to attract people that want to be in venture capital.
Yep.
At that time, we were kind of not known as anything. And so we were kind of saying, look, we just want to build cool things. So no one knew what to bucket us in. No one knew anything. So I was able to find people and bring people into the team that were from diverse backgrounds and had an interest in company building more than investing. And I think today that's the journey I'm back to, is getting back to the place where we want to bring people together that are interested in company building, come from different walks of life, so that you can create unique energy that then allows you to create opportunities.
And I think one of the things that Lightbox was always known for is that you took substantial equity, because that's how you knew you were being paid for your time.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't about, hey, let me have 5% equity or 10% equity. It was like, I remember most of your equity is about 25% or higher is how I remember. Furlenco, I think, as well. And now, as you see the ecosystem today, right, with all this conversation, which I'm not a big proponent of it, is that founders now want to talk about that I don't want to dilute too much, right? But the point is, unless you've got a model figured out, you'll have to keep raising money till you get there, and which means you have to dilute, right? Without dilution, this thing doesn't work. But do you see that there is a middle way where because again, and I believe that the only way venture investors and I think you're not traditionally the venture guy. You're a private equity. You're not investing in just ideas. You're investing in something that is far more substantial. But do you think that we come to a point where founder dilution needs to be talked about, or founders just need to be comfortable with dilution?
So I think our ownership position also is a reflection of the natural state of the market. So we were talking earlier, I think I said that the number of 10 billion plus outcomes in India is limited.
Yeah.
So you're kind of range bound in terms of what your exit's going to look like. And so let's say that, I don't know, your range is between 50 million and 500 million. Now let's just pick 200, 300 million. All right, 200, 300 million is your outcome possibility, highest probability. That's where you're going to land.
True.
Now, if you run a $100 million fund, and let's just say you want to deliver a 4x on the fund, so you want to get to 400 million. Now, you're going to invest in a set of companies, and your outcomes in those businesses are in the $200 to $300 million range. Again, we'll go with 200, and we say your ownership, let's say, is 10%.
Yeah.
How are you going to do it? Like, how's it going to get there with the amount of capital you're going to deploy? When you start to do the math on all of this, if you own like 5%, 10% this, it doesn't create the multiple that you need on the capital you're deploying. And especially then, if you're going to have enough failures on the other side of it all. So,
True.
So given all of this, at least for me, it became the direction I wanted to go, was saying, look, I'd rather tie my fate to a handful of people, be very vested with them, say that we're going to do more than just give you the money, and literally, I wake up every morning and I think about every company because I can. I have today we actively have about 11 active companies. I can think about every business. I can call every CEO every week. And not that I do, and I think they would lose their mind if I did. But we talk often enough that they know. And I think that one of the things that I lived through as CEO in the previous instances of different companies was, it's a very lonely existence. As a CEO, you're expected to have the answers to your employees and to your investors. And you sit there wondering, what the hell am I doing?
Yeah.
And I have none of the answers is really where you sit. And so to be able to be a person who will be empathetic with them, engage with them, call them not when you have a problem, but when you feel like they need someone to talk to, or just generally be there, I think is really helpful to them in their journey. And I was talking to someone else who said, in these businesses, it is often that one person that can make a difference in the company. And often it's this state of mind of the CEO that makes a big difference as to what's going to happen. And their state of mind, we said earlier, they're crazy people.
Yeah.
So and I mean that with the utmost respect, that craziness is what creates the opportunity, but it's very fragile. And therefore, there are things that are happening in their life that if they're out of whack, makes their ability to continue to progress in this direction also very challenging. And I would also say that there's a lot said about as a fund, investors talk about being founder friendly.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know that that's the best answer. I think that, and you said earlier, we're very private equity-esque, and I think that that's absolutely right. And I think I had one of our LPs tell us that venture guys are way too nice, and I reflected on that, and I agree with him. And I think that, in this drive to believe that we must be founder friendly and position ourselves as founder friendly, you lose track of the fact that the most friendly thing you can do to the founder is create value for their equity. Yeah. And creating value for their equity often may mean that you have to be founder unfriendly.
Yeah.
And I think accepting that and the ecosystem accepting that and founders accepting that what they should filter for from an investor is somebody who is going to tell them the truth the way it is, tell them that they are stupid when they're stupid, great when they're great, and help them get out of the situation when they don't have the skills to do it, is probably more valuable to them than having someone who's going to tell them that they're the best thing in the world and that the sun shines from them. And so, and I think that to do that and to do that well with the founder means that you have to have trust with them and a relationship with them. And all of that comes back to then saying, I can only do that with a handful of people. And if that's the case, then I have to own significant equity in those businesses. And that kind of works from all angles.
Makes
the
sense.
Market reality, the dynamics of the founder, the reality of venture businesses. And I think that that's honestly, and it's also what genuinely interests me. I couldn't wake up and start to cycle through 100 companies and think about each one and all the problems they have. And I think therefore you have a different mindset and an understanding of how to triage if you run a portfolio of that scale, and that's a skill that I don't have, and I know. So therefore, I'm saying I'm happier in this world.
And usually, then Sandeep, like as you've obviously Lightbox 1, Lightbox 2, and now Lightbox 3. How has that journey now transformed? Like over the last 11 or 12 years of being now a real fund manager, not what we would call managing a portfolio. You're now actually responsible for a set of capital that is dedicated and managed by you, about 450 million in AUM today. This is invested AUM. I'm not talking about TVPI. How has that journey changed for you, right? And have you now? Do you go back and say, you know what, was it easier back then, or is it getting easier today?
I was talking to someone the other day, and we were having I forgot what we were talking about. I was talking to someone who was telling me about his son, and his son was a public market investor, and he was saying that he lived through some challenging experiences, and that then changed his perspective on the market. And I was just commenting to him that I think that the longer you spend in an industry, the more, and I'm going to say this, cynical, realistic, pessimistic, one of that words you become. And I think that the optimism with which I started, and if I go back to 2005, and I came saying that anything's possible. This country's going to be amazing. Everything's going to change overnight. We're going to create this great business. All this stuff is going to happen. Then you live for 5-6 years and you look at it and you say, okay, it's a bit harder than I thought. Then you start to raise capital. And then you say, okay, well, that was a pain in the ass. And okay, finally got through that. Okay, now I figured out how to raise money. Now you start investing and you say, okay, well, we've understood those businesses. Those might be not the kind. Now we want to invest in these kinds of businesses. This is what the market's ready for. And then you start to do that and you say, well, oh, wow, we didn't realize that that's going to have those issues. And you start to realize, okay, that's hard. And then every now and then you see a green shoot out of something that's working and suddenly you're like, wow, okay, this actually does work. But then you're like, wait a second, was that luck or was that a formula?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, the question is of, I would say that the struggle probably is to continuously find, to unlearn, so to speak. And to say that, listen, whatever happened there is a problem, it's okay. The opportunity is still large. And I think that that's actually, funnily enough, I get a fair amount of that energy from pitching to LPs because you're forced to tell the story over and over again. And when you go out there to tell the story, and because look, when you're running companies and when you're in the business here, it's you spend your time looking at the negative. You don't spend it. You never do a portfolio review and sit there and say life is beautiful. Life could be good. Businesses could be going well, but you'll sit there and say, why isn't this working? Why isn't this happening? What could we be doing more here? And that's a heavy process, so to speak. It's a necessary process, and it's good to push. But I think at the end of the day, when you're out pitching a story, you're talking about the opportunity, the dream, the possibilities. And I think ultimately that's what we're all about. We're all about dreaming. We're all about dreaming for, hey, how could this happen? Where could we go with this? Isn't it going to be amazing that the future is going to look like? And we talked about all the inefficiencies that exist. How can we create something out of that? And that's exciting. And I think that's what, so coming after going through all this for all these years, there are days in the journey where you're back at the bottom saying, God, this market sucks. It's just not going to happen. DPI is never going to get created. We're never going to generate liquidity. And by the way, I think we're over invested as a market. I think it seems like to me, every day I hear about a new venture fund starting, and I'm like, okay, what are we going to do with all this capital? And that then it becomes the existential question of, okay, so what are we doing differently? And why do we want to exist? And what are we going to create? And I think I have answers to those questions, and I think we're building on those. But it's important to question that, I think, regularly. And I think, that's perhaps what keeps me going.
I think what you're getting at, and I think maybe because coming from the capital markets, I've just seen this happen as a cycle. Like something starts working, and then immediately you'll have a lot of people that will want to copy the same thing. And I'm sure you see this even in markets, right? If you have a great venture like a Bombay Shirts company, a lot of people will try to copy that very quickly, right? But then eventually it's the person who really had the longer term institutional vision, or that to build something and will stick in the fight, those are the ones that really last. I think the same thing happens in capital markets, because we come from a family that did a lot of these arbitrage opportunities, or what you call hedge fund opportunities. From 98 to 2010, we were my father, my uncle, and my their two first cousins. I think they did a significant chunk of the liquidity for the exchanges through their arbitrage. Each one managing about 100 traders each, and it was a pretty large operation. But and since they were making so much money doing it, suddenly everybody was doing arbitrage, right? Yeah. And then the options market came in, and then obviously things, and then you would find people who would just be like 2-person operations in Borivali that are sitting with two computers and doing it. And now if you look at it, all that opportunity is gone. Yep. And we're all just talking about arbitrage funds, right? It's all about, hey, DSP has an arbitrage fund, or Invesco has an arbitrage fund. And I think that's what eventually will happen over here. Right? All these venture funds, and I've seen many of the family offices launching them, is that it's somebody in the family office who thinks that how can I save that 1 or 2% management fee, and I'll try doing this on my own, but not realizing that you're literally throwing out the bathtub with the bathwater, because it's not, when you're managing other people's money, it's a whole different ballgame. You've done it for 11 years. I'm now on my 6th year doing it. There's quarterly updates. There's every single decision has to be thought through. I can't, as a family office, I could decide, hey, I want to invest in a business that makes this. Yeah. Just makes this, and I have nobody to answer to, because hey, I only answer to my family. But as a fund, I have to pretty much explain, hey, how did this sort of a venture, make it to the PPM, or a match with the PPM that I gave the LP, and did it go through the entire process we're talking about, or do I have, some other ulterior motive with this business? I don't think many family offices are prepared for that. But for now, it's very easy and effectively cheap to launch a fund, because if you have 25 lakh rupees, you can at least get your Cat 1 or Cat 2 license. Can you run a fund or not? That's a whole different question altogether.
It's the one job that we do here where everybody seems to do it as a hobby as well.
Yeah.
And I'm amazed at it. Like I'm just and I find that I spend a lot of time worrying and trying to do it, and I don't think we do it that well. I mean, it's hard.
Yeah.
And and I think that this question of saving fees, and if that is the logic behind why people do it, I think it's unfortunate and very short-sighted in that sense, because really, and actually, first of all, venture as an asset class is a poor asset class. Yeah. Hands down, we should first understand. You should not be doing venture if you believe that, wow, I'm going to create great returns and it's going to be amazing. Because the average venture fund does not return money. And so it barely gets to 1x. Now, if you look at that and you say, okay, now I'm going to do this and I have no differentiated rationale or ability to do it, then I'm the average.
Yeah.
So best you can hope for is get your money back. That's the best you can hope for. Now, you should do it, I think actually, then you should do it as sort of a passion side project and say that, fine, I'm willing to lose this money, but I get to play around with a bunch of stuff, so be it. But if you're doing it as an asset class to make a return on, then you have to do it with the people who actually are going to spend the time to try to deploy and create some value out of that and run a system and an approach that actually makes some sense. Otherwise, I mean, I don't know. I think, and it's unfortunate because it gets a lot of excitement, right? Like today, I know I'm having a conversation internally now about Zepto secondary, and I'm really not sure what to say because the market that seems to be buying into it, I'm not sure if they are the people that have spent the time to understand it. So are they the people to price it correctly? I don't know. But it will get priced. It will get, and I think it's great for the people that have deployed capital. Because look, we do need circulation in the system.
Yeah, absolutely.
So money coming in, money coming out is good.
It's definitely become a more mature market. But I think you're gonna what I think is gonna happen over the next 2 to 3 years. You'll see a lot of these newbie venture funds start to clear out, right? Yeah. Because they'll start realizing that, like you said, I may not even return capital back, and I've spent the last 5 years or 6 years of my life trying to build a portfolio that's never going to make me carry.
Yeah.
Or I'm never going to raise fund too because for whatever reason, I think those you're starting to see the cracks develop as you see more and more of these write-offs coming in, and then the real, the ones that ran, let's say, a process or ran a strategy behind the investment, those will emerge. It's just right now a big sea in which unfortunately every single bobblehead looks the same.
But I'll tell you, I think the structure of this industry is messed up in the sense that, let's think about how you raise funds. You raise fund 1, you have 3 years to deploy. At the end of 3 years, you raise fund 2. Okay? You raise fund 2, you have another 3 years to deploy. So now you're 6 years in. And if you're a venture fund, in the first 6 years of the first set of investments, you still don't know anything. Now you're on fund 3. Now you've got to raise fund 3. You don't really know if fund 1 strategy is playing out well or not. But what are you going to do? You have to raise fund 3. So you raise fund 3 on the same set strategy. Now you go ahead and now you're in year 8 and you've realized some of fund 1 strategy was wrong. Not only that, the market has changed in the last 8 years. Yeah. But you've sold fund 3 on a certain strategy already. So now what do? You keep going, right? So, I mean, let's think, and I had the unfortunate reality of I had a break for the last 5 years from raising a fund. We went through some changes at Lightbox and caused a natural pause in our approach to raising capital.
That was a question I was going to ask you. When you started, we had these 4 people, effectively co-founders with you that started the business together. And there was a journey also knowing each other, right? And there's a very interesting stuff because I think you knew some of these people maybe from different walks of life, but I don't think you had ever worked with these people in a business. So how did you guys start? And you were working in a market that itself was evolving, right? So it must have been a very interesting journey. A whole entrepreneurial journey of backing other entrepreneurs. How were you guys?
So on the first point, actually, I would say that my general statement for India overall is India is a country that's going through many changes in parallel.
Yeah.
So I think that when we look at the market, you're going through growth in per capita income at the same time that organization is happening, at the same time that technology is penetrating. So you're seeing all these things happen together. So I think we live in a world that changes happen in parallel, and I started a business in a situation where we set ourselves up with many changes in parallel, which makes things very complicated. Now, I tend to talk from a conclusion first and then give the rationale. So my conclusion is, I think venture businesses should be run like companies. There should be a CEO, there should be clear ownership, there should be clear competency of skills among everybody else. I am less and less in favor of the idea of looking at us as a fund that's labeled with these partners that all do similar things because it's not that useful. So today, our structure today, I look at managing the fund. I have a partner, Ashish, who comes from True North. He spent 16 years there as an operating partner and 10 years before that at Marico. And his interest and excitement in life is operations of companies. That's all he cares about. He loves getting involved in the details of how businesses are executing. And it's at a depth that I quite honestly don't have the patience. I have the desire, I have the stated interest, but there's no way I can go and have that the level of patience that he does, and the insights that he does from all the years he's had doing this. So we've now decided that we're very functionally oriented, and so therefore I'm clear. I won't do what he does. He doesn't do what I do, and I think that's what we didn't have at the beginning. We set up based on what everybody told you what a venture business is. What's a venture business? Your partners. Have 4 partners. They all do the same thing. You guys are interchangeable because if one of you gets hit by a bus, then somebody else can take the role, right? This is the methodology. Now, today you invest in a company. If a founder gets hit by a bus, okay, that's a real problem.
Yeah.
You deal with it.
We had a founder who passed away.
And so you have to deal with
And
this issue.
The business shut down because he was actually it was a food business and he was the chef. And if once the chef is gone, like what happens to the business? We had zero idea. I mean, it was unfortunate incident, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
But this is this is a risk that you can't diversify away, and you create more complexity, in my opinion, by trying to do it. I had one of our LPs tell us that, as we went through a lot of the changes, he's like, look, there are funds that they're invested in where the partners hate each other, but they stay together just because it's economically too valuable to split apart. I think that's a terrible way to live life. And I think that
spending 12 hours of your day with people you don't like.
Yeah, and in a structure that you're not happy in, all because you can make a lot of money. I mean, it doesn't seem right. And so I think, look, as much as we all came together, and yes, I'd known everyone through different areas, and I brought everyone together because I felt that the diverse experiences and backgrounds would help make us smarter about how we looked at things. And that was true until we got to a certain point where I think running the operation in a manner that kind of reflected this idea of partnership became hard.
Right.
And therefore, we made the decision to move apart. And I think that was good. And I think, quite honestly, I believe that if you're also, we talked earlier about people being crazy, I also think that unnatural things happen when you bring the right energy together.
Right.
And I think in life, you have either expansive energy or constricting energy. And if you decide to surround yourself with expansive energy, then that allows you to start to think about things in different dimensions and find opportunities that didn't exist before. And I think I'm back to that now. Yeah. We're back to the zone for us personally as Lightbox, where the energy in the room and around the table and in the conversations is all about what is possible. Look, I also believe we are all dreamers. You are spending your day in the best possible way, dreaming about what is possible. And I really think that that's what got me to do this at the beginning, and that's what keeps me doing it today, is the fact that I can sit down with anybody anywhere and have a conversation about what they're dreaming about, and that's my job. I mean, what a cool job, right? I mean, who gets to do that? Like and then you get to work with people to help them realize that dream and iterate on it. And I think so finding people that really appreciate that that's what we're doing and that's what the opportunity is about, and then finding investors that want to be a part of that journey and believe that there's some value to be created and had with that. I mean, these are, you have to handpick everything. And I think that that's what the next set part for me is, to take the last 20 years of learning, understand it both from a market perspective, a team perspective, and an LP perspective, and say who are the right people to bring around the table now so that we're doing the right set of things for the next 20 years. So yeah.
Wow. And so now Lightbox 3 it's what it's are you,
so we're investing out of Lightbox 3 now.
Okay.
So,
And what's the strategy now? Let's say, because it's you're in deployment stage, and I'm guessing you're looking at 10-year journeys at this point, right?
No, so we've so this is a 2018 fund. So
Okay.
we've largely invested from it. I'll tell you some of the reflections we've had, and actually as we've been digging deeper into our companies, we've realized that. I'll give you an example of InMobi. So when we invested in InMobi, and this is also another understanding, where you start and where you end, night and day. And what you thought was going to happen didn't happen. So when we invested in InMobi as a business, we invested in it saying mobile phones are big. At that time, there were 400 million mobile phones in the country. Advertising on mobile platforms should get large, but all the mobile advertising platforms were kind of non-existent in India. And the only ones were really Google and at that time Yahoo, and Facebook to an extent. And so we said, look, we can build a mobile ad platform here, and we'll focus it on sort of the mobile phones for the market here. So instead of someone accessing, let's say, an ESPN website here and seeing an ad for Walmart in the US, let them see an ad for Reliance Retail here. And that's essentially what we're trying to solve. But I think one of the things that Naveen did early on, he said, listen, at some point, Google and everyone else is going to wake up to the opportunity set that's here. So therefore, we have to make sure our tech is really good.
Right.
So he decided early on, and just really to his credit, saying that we're not going to compromise on what we invest in tech. We're going to make our tech really solid so that when they come, we'll be ready. And if you take InMobi's core businesses, there are publishers on one side and advertisers on the other. We're going to match the two with the user who wants to see the right ad. And we'll take a cut in the middle. Putting the right ad on the right piece of content for the right user is where all the magic happens. And therefore, if you get it right, the guy who owns the content gets paid better because he gets a higher CPC or CPM on that ad, and the user is happy because he gets the right ad that he wants. Now, all of that requires a lot of tech to make it happen. Now, what we thought we were doing and what we were excited about was that, okay, India is going to be a big mobile market. Advertising is going to go there. Great. What we got wrong, and this is actually something very simple that we should have thought of in the beginning. The ad market in India is small. So forget it. No matter what you do, the ad market's small. So at the end of the day, we can build this thing and it can be great and you can shift dollars from, let's say, offline to online, but how many dollars are you shifting? At what pace? Is it going to build a business fast enough? Now, unfortunately, we didn't think about any of these things, right? We just said, great opportunity, mobile advertising, let's go. Now, again, what happened in the business? We were talking to someone like CNN saying, we'll monetize your inventory in India. And they're like, listen, if you're doing it in India, can you look at Thailand and Indonesia for us? And can you look at South Africa as well? Because, we're not really generating anything there. And so India itself, fine, great. But so the publishers start to take the company into other markets. And as a company, we didn't say no. And this was actually critical because you could have sat there and we were the largest shareholder at that point. We put $7 million in this company. I think we owned 40% at the time. And,
wow.
Naveen said, look, we're going to launch, I want to say South Africa was the first market. Maybe it was Thailand. We're going to launch one of these markets and we're going to start doing this. Okay, let's see what happens. And it didn't cost anything, right? Because you built the tech in a way that allowed for any of this to happen. And so what did it take? Someone had to get on the plane, go there and find an advertiser because we already had the content, the publisher. We're the publisher, we need an advertiser. So suddenly, I think either Abe or Amit, one of the co-founders, would be on a plane to Thailand or South Africa, and they would go and spend maybe a month there, figure out the advertising landscape, and say, all right, we got some advertisers. So suddenly now, okay, I guess South Africa's running. Okay, I guess Thailand's running. Now, okay, let's see if we can start competing in some of the core markets. So you ended up in Europe, and then you ended up in Japan. And, this all was enabled. And actually, this is one of the things that we've been driving home with our companies of late, because Naveen decided that I'm going to build a business that's great at tech. That was the thing he said, I'm not going to compromise. And some amazing engineers working on the product, prioritize the engineering, all of that allowed him to be in a position to take advantage of something. What I find today is many companies are not good at anything, not great at anything. They're probably not even good at anything.
Yeah.
They're just in the business. They're in the business. And so there's a book called AI Superpowers by Kai-Fu Lee. And he talks about the fact that US entrepreneurs are missionary. They are in it to build the most unique, elegant solution to a problem nobody else has figured out. And they take very much pride in being that. The Chinese entrepreneurs are mercenary. They are in it to just kill everyone and win. And he says and in the book he makes a comment saying that you think it's bad that the Chinese entrepreneur copied the US idea. The fact that once he's copied the US idea, there are 50 guys copying him. And that's what he's up against. And so they are like gladiators in a thing. And he didn't make a comment on Indian entrepreneurs. But I was just trying to extend that thought in my head. And I came to the conclusion that unfortunately I find that too often we are more status seeking and driven by valuation and capital raises than necessarily either winning nor elegantly solving the problem. And that's not to say that's everyone across the board, but I do feel like the market has driven this view of, the success in entrepreneurship is raising capital. And therefore that's stopped people from going after what they really set out to do at the beginning. Be great at this part of what they're up to. Naveen got it right, and that was great. And we're having a conversation, many of our portfolio companies today, and Ashish started this from our side in talking to them about what are you really great at? And let's understand that very clearly. And this is not necessarily a radically new idea. It's a very simple thought of, look, you have to be really great at something to merit being around, to extract a premium, to build a business. Because look, if you're not profitable as a business, you're an interesting idea.
Yeah.
And at some point, an interesting idea is no longer interesting until because people won't want to keep funding it. To be a business, you have to be able to generate a profit. I mean, this is not a theoretical discussion. This is not a hypothetically, is that what a business? No, a business makes money.
That's
so
it.
Let's figure out how to make money.
First dharma, I think, of a business is to make a profit.
Yeah. I mean, but we've lost sight of that, right? You lose sight of that in the quest to say that I'm changing the world. You can't talk to me about making a profit right now. I'm in the middle of changing how everything's going to happen. That will come later. Don't worry. Now that answer just doesn't fly anymore, and I personally don't want to be in that world. And if you are, you should have a really big checkbook to play that game, and I don't.
Yeah.
So therefore, I want to be in businesses where we understand the economic model and we can get there in a defined period of time, and where you're working with entrepreneurs who want to keep doubling down on where they are going to be great and differentiated. And oftentimes that takes pulling everyone back to that point because, and we were talking, I think, a little earlier about the ecosystem of funding is set up for people to do exactly the opposite. The ecosystem is set up for me as a fund to want to mark up my investment, to make our LPs feel great about it, to make them then feel good about what they're doing, to then get the next fund and do this, and therefore...
And not to write off investments.
Not to write off investments, right? All of this is set up the wrong way. But fine, let's assume that game is a game, but you can play for what you actually think is right. And I think that's where real businesses get created. And that's, again, to Naveen's testament, to Sanjeev's testament at InfoEdge. He had told me early on, and I think he still has it on his wall in his office, that when they were making a profit it must have been like 2002, 2003, someone came to him and said, look, we'd like to invest in the company, but we see you're making a profit. Like, yeah, we've been making a profit for a while. Well, then you clearly have a vision problem. He was like, what? So, I mean, this is the nature of how people think about it. We had Nua in our portfolio, sanitary pads business, turn profitable last year, and they set out to go raise some money. And when they set out to raise money, they then found that they wanted to raise 2 or 3 million. The first person they spoke to said, what if we gave you 20? Could you build it much faster? And thankfully, Ravi, just like, I don't want that much money. I don't want that burden. That's not how I want to build this. I'm building in a more measured way. And he kind of rationalized, he rational thinking set in for him. And he said, look, this is...
No, in fact, I remember the story of how Sanjeev even invested in Wow Momos, right? Wow, he asked I think he met him at an event and asked Wow that why are you raising money? He said, I need to raise money to grow. My business pays for operations. I need money for growth. And that was just the conversation. I think that's what venture money is supposed to be towards, right? Or at least later stage venture money needs to be towards, hey, how are you going to grow this thing? But have you figured out what you have to figure out before the growth happens? And that's why I love that statement from Shark Tank, right? Pouring gasoline on something is the easiest thing. I have never had an issue in any of my investments with scale. Scale can be figured out if the problem you're solving and whether it's something very, very unique and the unit economics have been figured out. Once those three things are there, the scaling part is the much easier part of the equation. But I think many of times, because of the way the venture game works, usually you want to scale fast first and then figure out the unit economics. That sometimes...
I mean, the answer that at scale I'll solve it is a scary one, right? And I think that the pressure gets started when, okay, look, we invest in a business. We invest... Okay, let's actually go back a few more steps. The idea of venture capital came about because the entrepreneur who wanted to start a software business or a biotech business had no assets against which to actually get a loan. He was not independently wealthy and was just a very smart person who had an interesting idea. So if you go back and look at the first venture investment that Kleiner did was Genentech. They put $5 million in a company that they basically started in their office. And that was their entire fund. So the first fund was a $5 million fund. And you go back and you say, look, this is where the industry was a cottage industry. And we've taken it from a cottage industry to saying now it's a scale asset class. And along the way, you've lost the rationale for where venture had a role to play in the traditional sense of venture. So we can still call it venture if you want, but venture the way it was earlier is very different than the way venture is today. And venture the way it was earlier was intended for businesses where there was no asset to collateralize against, and therefore there was no debt to borrow. You were not wealthy enough to put the money in yourself, and yet you had an idea that you felt could do something interesting. And therefore it required little money, not lots of money, little money to get going. And what you were going to do with that little money was build a product first.
Yeah.
And then you were going to validate the product. And if the product was validated and worked, then you got a little bit more money to take it to a few more customers. And then when that happened, then you got a little bit more money to take it more. And each of the signs of the rounds of incremental capital was a reflection of validation of the business.
Correct.
Today, when a company raises Series B and Series C, oftentimes they still have not figured out any product market fit. They've just simply run through money well. And therefore they need more money. And they've told a story well. And therefore they'll raise more capital. If I look at it and say, if you're raising $50 million, you probably should have a business that makes some sense. Today, that's not necessarily the case. There's no evidence to indicate that a $50 million round means that the business is any more de-risked than it was when it raised its first $5 million. And I think that that's a scary reality. So therefore, the signal or the proxy that a large fundraise means that it's de-risked is not the case. The biggest blow up in the case of here is Byju's, right? Yeah. Saying all this money went in, it must be working. No, it wasn't. We were talking earlier about a Gensol business. Yeah. All this money's gone, things must be right. No, and you look at FTX. So look, two emotions drive everything: fear and greed.
Yeah.
Right. And at some point in time, the greed takes over, and you start saying, "I gotta be in," and therefore the market just goes nuts. And we live in a business that's all sentiment driven.
Yeah.
So that sentiment either goes high, low, and
I also feel that that maybe venture capitalists, and maybe because the newbie venture capitalists get very enamored by founder backgrounds and by how well the founder can pitch. Right? And you see more and more of those kind of people. Like, there are some amazing businesses in our portfolio even today, and when I look at yours, where maybe the founder is not the best pitcher, but he's a great CEO. Right? He knows what he's building, but he may not be your category A level pitcher with fantastic presentation skills and can get a new investor just to buy shares at an insane value. But sometimes those people are also getting those kind of pitchers usually get better valuations, and then the people that are actually doing the hard work and are actually building solid businesses start getting the rough end of the stick, or but I think in the longer run, it's unfortunate that in the short run it all looks like this. But now that I've been and you've been in the journey for 20 years, I'm now looking at venture. I'm on my 14th year of investing in journeys. I've realized that if you just let those guys be and don't keep pushing them to worry about, hey, this guy raised more money than you, or that guy raised more money than you, in that longer run, because we're all investing in 12, 15-year cycles, those guys give amazing returns.
You have a core to actually bet on. You have something, you have a skill, you have a person, you have some depth to it, right? And I think that's there's another statement that we don't have to be smarter than the rest. You have to be more disciplined than the rest. And I think that this idea that, listen, let's just do the things that we want to do well. And I think, honestly, for us as a fund, we got a little carried away, in my opinion. So we entered certain businesses at a late stage when we shouldn't have, that we didn't know how to price. We got caught up in the idea that suddenly, everything's hot. We need to be doing now, otherwise we won't be able to play. And these were all mistakes again. And I look back at it and I say that without clear leadership within our organization, it becomes difficult for any specific approach to hold. Yeah. And so you might have the intention to, but suddenly when you run an organization without singular sort of leadership, then you end up kind of succumbing to whatever moves at that moment. And I think that was a mistake. And I think that you have to learn from these things. And if you stay disciplined within what you're doing, and you start to focus the companies on what they're good at, and you also realize, and you were talking about companies that are good at storytelling and good at execution. And I said earlier that there's this whole idea of founder-friendly versus business-friendly. I think also recognizing that, listen, the guy that started the business may be really good at getting it off the ground. And that zero start is hard. To sit down and say, it's almost like writing. A blank piece of paper, now you got to write. Now, once you start, editing is much easier in life.
Yeah.
So therefore, the guy who started, he's worth a lot, and he's great for him for doing that. But he may not be the right guy to tell the story next. He may not be the right guy to scale the story next. So can you accept that? And can you take these situations where, and I think that's actually the role that an investor should play more, is helping bring these different aspects out.
Yeah.
Helping that founder understand what their role is great at, helping that next person step into that role, helping create this. You have to, and that should be the experiences that we leverage to come to bring to bear here.
I think eventually, and probably around Series B, is the time to decide whether the founder is ready to be an operator or still wants to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Because from Series B onwards, it's not as exciting. The business looks exciting from outside, but the internal parts are all about policies and starting to have processes in place, and you can't just overnight come and change things.
Yeah. And also, let's look at the companies we're investing in. These are not product software businesses that are dependent on a 22-year-old's insights on user experience that's going to change things. These are hard, challenging businesses that have operational complexity. Where, okay, now we have to run a retail operation. Now we have to deal with manufacturing. Now we have to deal with suppliers. Now I'm dealing with working capital cycles. Like, people have done that before. Let them step in and let them help you execute that, right? And you're not dependent on that individual founder in the same way.
So now let's, and I think it's a great segue because when you started, it's a bit more software heavy kind of a business, right? InMobi and Cleartrip. And then I think Lightbox in the middle has been known for Bombay Shirt Company, a lot more consumer facing stuff. And now as you look at this new journey that is starting, I think it's Lightbox 4, what are you investing in now?
Yeah. So I think that when we came in 2005, it was very straightforward. Tech businesses where you have extreme leverage. Build a platform once, one transaction, 100,000 transactions. Incremental cost is negligible, so no problem. We'll build these. So your Cleartrip, your MapMyIndia, your InfoEdge, InMobi, all of that went there. By the time we got to setting up Lightbox, we looked around and we said, look, all the pure software opportunities are going to get addressed by a lot of the global guys. And so your Google of India is Google, your Twitter of India is Twitter, your Amazon of India is Amazon. So, it's going to be hard to find a way to differentiate against them. But look at all the natural problems we have here, the natural opportunity that exists in all the chaotic offline stuff. And again, we go back to that statement that the country's going through changes in parallel. So I don't have, and actually, I don't know if you go back in time, there was a movie called You've Got Mail. You've Got Mail was Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, and it was, Tom Hanks was running the big bad bookstore that was taking over the small little mom and pop bookshop. And, that was the world that America lived through. In India, we didn't go through that cycle. The big bad bookstore got killed by the online guy before he even was born. Crosswords was there, and then suddenly it wasn't there. And so, we're going through these changes in parallel where the back-end infrastructure to enable the delivery and logistics is happening at the same time that the warehouse is getting built, at the same time that the customer acquisition is going on. So therefore, there is going to be absolute chaos and inefficiency in how this is done. And that's fine. But let's accept that, and therefore there's going to be a lot of loss of capital in it because people are going to get ahead of themselves. We're going to build payment systems before we actually have users ready for them. We're going to build delivery networks before we have apps ready to have people access it. Or you're going to acquire customers before you can actually deliver to them. So all of this is going to happen. Now, therefore, what we said is, look, stepping away from pure tech businesses, we said, look, tech-enabled makes sense. So now we can own the products, so you can own product margin in addition to distribution margin. So Rebel, I make the food instead of just deliver the food. So I get the product margin. Furlenco, I design the furniture, manufacture the furniture. I have to get good then at how operations run. And now I'm talking about being really like a private equity guy, because now I'm saying I'm worried about things like debt. I'm worried about things like working capital. I'm worried about things that venture guys in tech businesses don't ever care about in life. In a venture-backed business, you can look at EBITDA and feel good about it because EBITDA is a proxy for cash flow. In other real-world businesses, EBITDA is not a proxy for cash flow. There's a lot of other stuff that's after that, duh.
Yeah.
And so, that stuff matters.
Which can also make you feel like, duh.
Exactly, right? So you're suddenly waking up to the reality that, look, I'm in a real world. I'm dealing with real finance issues. And so I think that, look, as I look forward on the horizon, I continue to believe that those are the opportunities that are going to be there. Take a business, and we have a business called Zeno, which is a pharmacy chain. we opted not to invest in online pure pharmacy businesses. We invest in a physical pharmacy business because we felt that pharmacy is one of those things where you tend to still want to go to the pharmacist for a variety of reasons. Your doctor spends a minimal amount of time with you today. When you ultimately, and the doctor in India is like God, but ultimately when you want some information, like the pharmacist is like your priest. Like he'll actually be the person who can translate everything that the God has said and said, this is what
Are
you
you
should
talking
do.
about the doctor's handwriting at this point? Because the only pharmacist can understand that, nobody
That-
else can.
Yeah, and you go to the pharmacist and you say, look, should I eat this before dinner, after dinner? Will I have any side effect? What can I do with this? So you value that relationship. So now we've opted to invest in this business where I believe going forward, density will be the biggest thing in this. So I need to create a Zeno on every street corner. And that's what we'll do. Now that's operationally intense. And however, there are companies that have been doing this. And now like we've gone and met with a variety of people that have built out retail businesses. Lenscart, Shoppers Stop. You look at the MedPlus has done this, and you look at businesses that have done it, you say, okay, this is doable. It's not rocket science. Now I just need the people who've done it to come here and help us do it. And that's what we'll do. So that's very private equity, where you're saying, look, I understand that people have done this. Let's bring them into it. So coming to your question, what will Fund 4 look like? More of the same. It's going to be more of this, but with much more intentionality around bringing the people that have done the things to come and help execute it with these businesses. Taking into account that the founders are going to be really smart at getting it going, but they will be benefited by having a lot of people that have seen these things elsewhere helping them do it.
And how are you finding these businesses? Do founders apply to you? Do you, what's the best way to reach out
Yeah. So
or excite Sandeep to at least look at this business?
I'm toying with going in the direction of don't call us, we'll call you.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is that should be what we're good at. That should be where we're thinking. That's where I want to put pressure on us as a team. So we do a lot of our own space analysis where we start to look at markets and say, okay, what do we think is going to change and why do we think is going to change, and then talk to people around it. And actually that, in my estimation, if you're an LP paying me money to do something, my job should be to go out and A, think proactively about what's going to change and happen, and B, manage those investments in a way that creates value on top of those or adds value to them. But that first part is important as well. And so therefore, for us, look, we have a portal, we have a site, you can apply there. I think in general, if it is about how to reach us, it's, find someone who knows us, get introduced, and then we'll talk. But I think that I really will value more and more. I will value our ability to be able to identify those opportunities that are emerging and take a call on why we think it's going to happen, and then go out there and get involved in it. And today we have a network of people that introduce us to stuff, and I think that's also going to continue to be there. The seed funds do a great job, whether it's the guys at Whiteboard or Sauce or K or Bloom, and so that becomes a starting point. And I think more and more so we'll look for companies that have had that initial traction to get involved with.
And now, and where do you now see the Lightbox journey for you as an entrepreneur? Obviously, after 2018 is the first time you're raising a fund after 7 years. Now, where do you see this? Where do you see Lightbox 10 years from now? Do you see it just being an India-specific portfolio? Do you see an ecosystem which you build outside?
One of the funds I've admired is Benchmark. And I think Benchmark has stayed, while the world has done many different things, whether it's been Kleiner or Sequoia or Excel, have all expanded into multi-asset classes, multi-billion-dollar products. They did an amazing job of just staying where they were, stayed in this $300 to $500 million range, and stayed at a certain partner level that they were at, and kept doing that. And I think that that's what we'll do. I really like what we do. I really enjoy the stage at which we work with entrepreneurs. I really enjoy the opportunity to get involved in ideas where you can be influential in the product. You can be influential in the positioning. You can think about the customer journey alongside the entrepreneur. So, yeah, I'm not, to me, it's not about AUM accumulation. It's about doing what you really enjoy doing. And I think we'll continue to do that this way.
And I guess because I have to ask this question, because it's the buzzword today, AI. Where do you see space for AI in your portfolio, or is it something that you expect your founders to utilize?
So in 2003 or 4, the same question was about mobile, and especially if you're in the US, there were companies that were built around transitioning things from a web page to a mobile environment.
Yeah.
And, so everyone's question will be, well, how will mobile impact this? Well, what will mobile be? AI is in that the same way. It's going to affect everything. It's going to be there. And I think it's how, now there's that other statement, worry about what's not going to change. So what's not going to change? You're still going to have to buy a shirt.
Yeah.
You're still going to look for sneakers. You're still going to need to eat food. Can I make the process better for how you do these things? You're still going to invest money in something. You're still going to need healthcare. You're still going to want to get educated. You're still going to want to be entertained. All of these things will be consistent. Now, AI will help absolutely make an impact. I mean, today it changes how I plan my holiday has changed radically. AI and how I use Perplexity and ChatGPT to do that just has restructured my entire approach to thinking about what I'm going to do. So absolutely it's going to make a difference. But at the end of the day, I still have to sit on a plane and go. And I still need to buy a ticket somehow, right? So how people think about integrating it into the businesses that exist, I think is going to be really important. And I think one of the great things about India is there's a lack of incumbency.
Yeah.
So therefore, everything has a shot. Now, suddenly, and that's actually why if I'm building an apparel company, today the apparel market is $70 billion. The top two players, Zara and Zudio, have a combined 1% market share. That means 99% of this market sits in a fragmented base.
Yeah.
So I can now go after it. I mean, take education. We have such a challenged education system. Take healthcare. We have such a challenged healthcare system that the opportunity is to just step in and really just start adding value to it. And therefore, you're not fighting existing systems. Like you look at the US, or you look at Europe, you have ingrained systems with billions of dollars that have gone into maintaining it. The entire medical system in the US, one of the biggest issues and what you see the current administration they're trying to do, we'll see where it goes, is revamp it because they're saying, look, it's broken. The incentive structure sucks.
Yeah.
We don't have that problem because we don't have healthcare access.
Yeah.
And so therefore we can change it. We can build it the right way from the beginning. And I think that, so AI sits in that realm of saying, I think everybody should be thinking about how to use it. It will play an active role in everything. But saying I'm going to invest in an AI company means nothing.
Yeah.
I don't think foundational AI will exist. Today, India is ChatGPT's biggest market. So, we're already using their product the same way we use Amazon, the same way we use Google. We don't use a different search engine in India. We use Google. So why would we use a different AI platform? We'll integrate those services and tools into things that get used in a way here. But ChatGPT is not going to deliver my food or sell me a shirt.
Yeah.
So I'll need those companies still.
I think I think this conversation, and I felt many times throughout it that we could just get into one thing and we could spend another couple of hours going so deep into it. But honestly, I think the 20 years ago is when you started this journey in some way, if you think about it, and it's such an interesting way to look at where you started 20 years ago and where we are in 2025. And it seems like if I venture to say, you're probably saying, hey, in 2045. I would have told you that 2025 was really the start of my startup.
Yeah.
In many ways. So I think it is a very, what I really enjoyed, Sandeep, all the way through is that, you've gone through so many challenges. I'm just talking about career-wise, decision-wise, and even within the starting up of Sherpalo, which became Lightbox and Lightbox itself, and then where you are today, it's a testament that, you have to just get going, right? At the end of the day, nobody's got it figured out. Nobody's ever going to get it figured out, right? Our job is to just take the cards we're dealt and then just start playing.
There's early on I'd read a book by Andy Grove from Intel, and they talked about the fact that at one point Intel was going through a lot of challenges, and he said that, look, if the board came in and fired us tomorrow and a new guy came in, what would he do? And they sat down, him and his co-founder sat down and said, okay, well, why don't we do that? And because you realize in life, I think you get bogged down by the context and the baggage of the situation that you're in, that you tend not to be able to see it for the great opportunity that it really is. When I was working with Ram and Kleiner, it was very easy to look at the situation when they said they wanted to pull out of India and say, oh my gosh, I'm so unlucky, I'm so unfortunate. So I said, look, I got the best two people in the world that I've worked with right now, and I can build upon that to go do something. And so I feel like... And I blame. I would say that education, the construct of the way in which we're educated also doesn't allow us to necessarily look at the the challenges or the difficulties that we face as opportunities in the same way that it could.
I think as a culture, we're not very comfortable with failure.
Yeah.
Very much.
Actually, I used to get asked this question about what should the government do to enable all this stuff. I said, just enable failure.
Yeah.
You know how long it takes to shut down an entity in this country?
Do you know how complicated it is?
I had to shut down the Sherpalo India entity. It took us 11 years.
Wow.
It just got done this year. So we've been, as Lightbox been around for 11 years, it just got done now. And for no reason. It wasn't even an operating entity in that sense. It was an advisory entity that was working here. So
and it's so complicated. I don't know why it's so complicated to shut down companies in India.
I think if you enable the failure, encourage it, ensure that it is handled efficiently and effectively, and then let's move on. And don't create so much time. This is another topic now. Yeah. Like, it's the things that we can do to make it better. But look, overall, I have nothing but extreme optimism for where this whole industry is going to go and where this country is going to go moving forward, because I think the people in general are on a path. And entrepreneurship, think about it, we have 55 million SMEs in this country. We are entrepreneurs by nature.
Yeah.
It's been there. People want to do stuff. And actually, that was one of the most amazing things. I went to college at Penn, and I met a lot of people from India, funnily enough. And you end up going 10,000 miles away, and you end up finding some of your best friends being Indians. But they were all motivated business people that were interested in growing their business. And they're now some of my closest friends, and they run some of the most interesting, more traditional businesses. But everyone is in it to progress and build and grow. And so with that energy that exists here, I think the next 20, 30 years are going to be amazing.
No, wonderful. I think it's a great segue to move into rapid fire, because we've had so much intense conversation today. And I hope we get this episode out as quickly as possible, because I think there's a whole graduating class that's
of which my son is one.
Yeah, exactly. And your son's going to college. I'm also saying the people that are graduating from college. There's an entire graduating class there, and really in about your career it's you're never going to end up doing what you thought you were going to you're going to be doing. And secondly, you just have to get going. Right, you'll find opportunities. I started as a door-to-door salesman. I had zero idea I was going to be a fund manager, that I would be doing a podcast today. I had zero.
And by the way, you were never trained in any of those things,
nothing,
right?
Nothing.
That's kind of cool. That, and accepting that and moving with it.
And I think the only thing that you can do, and I love the fact that, because I went to a college that actually encouraged you to say, just learn how to learn. As long as you know how to learn, you can be educated for life.
Yep.
Right, but if you're just learning a skill, and that's all you know how to do, then you're done, right? Because once that skill becomes irrelevant, and it's I went originally to become a computer science engineer, and C++ is what I learned. I don't even think people know what C++ is today, right? Yeah. And it's not a better vitamin C, right? But that's the case. But I think, Sandeep, I'm going to move to rapid fire, because it's time to put you under the gun a little bit and see when you don't have chance to articulate your answers quickly, what are you going to say, right? So I'll tell you the rules of rapid fire very quickly. I have a set of around 10 questions. Whatever first comes to mind, just go ahead and say it, right? And if there's any interesting, I'm sure we'll get a little bit deeper into it, right? So are you ready? Do you need to take a sip of water?
Let's go.
Okay, cool. First thing you do right after you wake up?
Unfortunately, it would be check the phone.
Check the phone. Okay.
Very, very unfortunate.
So since you check the phone first, what's one app you're completely obsessed with right now?
Oh, I don't. So honestly, I don't play that many games, or I'm not on Instagram. I'm not active on Twitter. I'm not. So to me, I can't even tell you what's the one app. Yeah, unfortunately, if I look at my phone screen time, it'll probably tell you WhatsApp and Superhuman. Are my two things I end up saying. I'm quite boring that way. The thing I do is I do the Wordle and that New York Times Mini.
Oh, nice.
But beyond that, no, I'm not. I used to really enjoy gaming on the phone, and then I realized my kids got better than me at it, and then it became very hard to kind of live up to that every time, and so I just gave up. So I used to play a lot of those Subway Surfer and
nice.
and paper toss and things like this. And then these guys play Clash like crazy, Clash Royale, and I can't.
It actually surprises me the kind of games, that and if you the kind of games even India India B and India C is playing, right? And I mean, I've seen sat behind my driver in a cab, and I've just seen him playing games, right? And because while we're waiting for someone to show up, and it's like, I mean, that's your core market. That right there, they're really into it. Ludo, for example. I mean, Ludo made insane amount of money during COVID. I know that we were like on Zoom chats with friends and playing Ludo together for like hours at an end. So yeah, I think India definitely has that. But yeah, you're right.
But I would say that one app I spent a lot of time in is Spotify as well.
Okay.
So I got into DJing a long time ago, and so there was this place called the True School here in Bombay, and I took some classes there.
Okay.
And then I bought the decks, and I got into the whole thing. And so therefore I try as much as I can to listen to music and know stuff. But yeah, no.
Well, since you talked about Spotify, what's a book or a podcast that has changed or influenced the way you think?
So there's this Extraordinary and Popular Delusions of Mankind by Charles Mackay. It chronicles a whole bunch of things that have happened over time. The most famous one would probably be the tulip craze in Holland in the 1800s. And so I think just speaking to the fact that, crowds and people move in certain directions. And how does that happen? And you were talking earlier about the guy who captivated people and, got them to really focus on things. I think understanding how that human psychology works, how it moves and how it changes, I think remains. And I think actually, if I could have gone back and done college again, I probably would have done psychology or more of that. And I think psychology is one of those things that's really important to do. And I think, so I'm a big fan of going for therapy as well, trying to understand yourself better. I think all of these things, which don't get enough attention in anyone's education process of any sort, whether it's your schooling or your college, you don't end up being told to think about how you feel, how you make other people feel, how to get people to move in a certain direction, how to create influence. So I think that book from early on played an important role.
What's the best piece of advice that you've received that you still follow till today?
When we were writing the business plan for our digital music company that we started with Sony Music, the guy that ran the incubator came to me, and I put together a set of projections. And projections were, you could say, pessimistic, because I thought that was sort of what I needed to do. And he came back and he looked at me, he's like, but could it be better? And I was like, yeah, I guess. But then, why aren't you thinking about that? And it wasn't so much about what to think about with the projections there. It was, I think that when you look at any situation, the situation is a situation. It's a perspective you apply to the situation that matters. And I think that what that just gave me, I kind of extended his perspective on it to say that, look, you can look at any situation and say that, look, this is how challenging it is, how difficult it is, or you can look at it and say, well, this is how much more it can become. And I think that the understanding to think about what perspective you're applying to a situation came from that. And I think that advice, which wasn't really advice, it was more, I guess, a statement that I kind of took into advice, to just look, be sure about the perspective you're taking on a situation, and then decide how you're going to react. So I think perspective matters.
One song that is on repeat on your playlist.
Man, that's a tough one. I range in music interests from sort of the traditional 80s kind of stuff. And it was funny, yesterday I was playing paddle with my son, and we were listening to 80s road trip music in the car. So ranging from Prince to Tears for Fears to Van Halen to then now, and then I go to Tomorrowland for an EDM concert. So, and then I'll listen to sort of beach kind of chilled music. So I find it very hard to say that I put anything on repeat, because I go through shuffle on a regular basis. One DJ that I've really liked over the years has been Alex Cruz. And so I think that vibe is really there for me. But I would say, and again, maybe it's influence of kids as well. I've gotten back into rap, and so back to sort of Jay-Z and Dre and all of that side of things, and not the newer stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I won't have one thing on repeat. I think it just I
But
like to
guess
keep
what
mixing
I
it.
understand is music is definitely a large part of your life.
Yeah. There's a speaker in my office. There's a speaker. I wired our entire office with music so that, and it's all connected to Sonos. So theoretically, I could make everyone listen to what I want them to listen to, which I don't. But we do keep music playing in the background everywhere. Music's an important part of life.
One company you wished you had backed.
Yeah, this conversation comes up a lot, doesn't it? I mean, there's that anti-portfolio question.
In this case, it may also be not be a company that was ever offered to you. It could just be a company that I wish I was in that company just for what the company is.
I've been really impressed by how Indigo built in the airline space, and I think that, and over the last couple of years, I had the chance to meet Aditya and talk to him about sort of how they went about it and what they did, and I think it would have been great to have been in that journey. We were building Cleartrip, so we were selling their product, but we never really, and I was using their product, but I think what they did was make it clear that low cost is not low quality.
Yeah.
And that's really cool when you think about it. And to get that across to people, to say that, look, we're going to give you a product at a price that you kind of are surprised, and change the entire conversation to on time, as opposed to anything else. I mean, they did so many interesting things and fun things and quirky things and change. And actually, I'll tell you, one of the things that I hope to do with Lightbox as well is we've never wanted to be this finance company. We've wanted to be more of a business building entrepreneurial environment where, like I said it many times, dreamers exist. And so therefore, I don't think dreamers exist in the world of Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah.
And deals are, and there's this other statement, deals are not won by spreadsheets, they're won by stories. And I think that you want to create that environment that feels a bit different. And I think, so for so many reasons, I feel that Indigo did a great job of that and created a brand in a space that just was known for very different stuff. And I think that's the thing, right? Like, Netflix did this in terms of saying your how you access your content was provided by utility. Then suddenly it became Netflix and chill. Yeah. Netflix was this different relationship. Suddenly it's a different product. It's loved. So I think Indigo would be the one that probably would.
And I agree with. In fact, I think Indigo went from saying low cost to saying no frills.
Yeah.
Right, and I don't think in many cases Indigo is the cheapest. I'm sure there are cheaper. Akasa could be cheaper, or Spice could be cheaper. Maybe in some cases even Air India Express could be cheaper. But yet people choose Indigo because they know barring the last 6 months, will always be on time, right?
Yeah, and they didn't have to run a whole bunch of advertising for that. Their campaigns were very limited. Their marketing cost was low, and they made that whole experience memorable, right? Yeah. The ramp that even models want to walk on.
Yeah, I just like how they took the 6E sexy, and made it sexy, right? I think it's very much on the lines of Southwest Airlines.
Yeah,
right. Southwest is the same chill thing, and I mean one of the companies I wish I had ever backed, and I did own shares of Southwest for a while. I don't know why I sold them ever. Was Southwest Airlines because and in fact their ticker code was LUV.
Yeah.
Because they were fighting for Dallas Love Field to become. There was some amendment that did not allow Love Field to fly to any other state but the neighboring states where they had a land border.
Really?
Some weird, very old law that they had, and so because they wanted to promote DFW over Love, and then they fought the amendment, and therefore changed their ticker code to LUV for the longest time.
Wow.
Love Field, right? And I was like, this is insane. What kind of a public company does that? But yeah, I think I definitely see there is some romance around airlines, right? And then the processes that they have to follow.
Yeah, I mean, there's that other statement: how do you make a millionaire take a billionaire and give him an airline, right? And so, but I mean, in that backdrop to create value is great.
I think the only two companies I can think of that really have created value without any significant government support has been Southwest and Indigo Airlines. Both have made a lot of money for their shareholders in the long run.
I wonder if did JetBlue? How did I don't know if JetBlue did well.
I'm not sure about it as a stock. I mean, I think Southwest only had one losing quarter, at least until I held it, which was the 9/11 quarter. And then I think, and if you look at Indigo Airlines, it's just it's a money printing machine.
Yeah.
At the moment. Yeah. Okay, I've got maybe two questions. A recent trend in venture capital that is making you nervous.
It's a little less mainstream or talked about, but I think that there's a lot of there was, at least for a while, a lot of founders coming back to negotiate for more ESOPs and more shares. And I think that this conversation around what do your previous commitments that you made as an entrepreneur stand for? And therefore, now what is that? Like, you raised the capital, you took the money at this price, you agreed on these things. Now you feel like you got shortchanged. Now we're going back, and actually people are addressing it, and people are willing to give into it. And so I kind of wonder what the sanctity of any of this really is then. Yeah. So if we're going to say, all right, we're going to raise money at this price, we're going to give this equity, but you know what? After 5 years, I'm going to feel demotivated, and therefore you're going to have to give me more equity again, is a bit, it just doesn't seem to make some sense. And so I think that that's one concern I have. Look, I think overall our industry, I said earlier as well, is sentiment oriented. So it's driven by sentiment of what people feel about what's about to happen. And I think that if you get too carried away in a hype cycle of one sort, then you'll end up crashing the sentiment eventually. I think when you made a comment earlier, I think about like the market being a teenager or something. And I think that India tends to be a market where that teenager gets drunk and gets hungover. And so I think I just worry about us. Right now, I feel really good about where the market is because it's not irrational. Yeah. It's balanced. People are skeptical. People are worried. They're nervous. That's all good. Let's say that.
I think that's the best market to be investing in. If Sandeep was not building Lightbox, what would he be doing?
That keeps changing in time. You know, there was a point in time where I would be, I would say, being a DJ was kind of the dream. If it wasn't that, it was surfing. But in all truth, if it wasn't Lightbox, I would be running a company of some sort. And I think building a business is what I would like to be doing. And that's honestly, like I think I said it earlier, I mean, I have the best job in the world. I get to keep thinking about new ideas and thinking about what might be out there and what we can do. And so if I didn't have that chance, then I would actually go build something.
And you know, one question I should have asked much earlier is that why the name Lightbox?
So a Lightbox is got a couple of different interpretations. One is in web design context, when you highlight over something, it's called using a lightbox on top of it. So that's kind of bringing out into focus and bringing bigger something that's underneath. And so that was appealing as an idea of saying, look, let's bring that out. The second was old cameras are called lightboxes. They invert the image and present it there. And so actually in our office as well, we used to have we went and bought all these old cameras and we kept them there. And so I liked both of those ideas of kind of capturing the image, presenting it to people back in a different way, highlighting out and bringing out what was there. And it was a simple one. What I didn't realize is there are so many lights. Light Rock, Light Speed, Light Smith. And actually we're co-invested in a company with two other lights. So it's fine. We often talk about the lights are meeting. And so
Well, Sandeep, I must thank you for this conversation. It's such a different perspective because we spoke to Sanjay Swami a couple of episodes ago, and he was actually there right in the middle of the 1999 boom. In fact, he was in a company, bought a house, and then was suddenly underwater on the mortgage, and it's so refreshing to keep hearing about the incremental way this venture ecosystem that we're building in India is being built, and that there's space for so many different perspectives, right? I mean, you're talking about, like you said, founder-friendly. I believe in company-friendly policies, right? You're saying business-friendly. But I think there is definitely a voice out there saying that, whatever is happening or has happened, it's definitely out of the norm and needs to change. And the fact that all of us, I mean, Sanjay's life story was also very, very interesting. And the number of things he's done, he was part of Aadhaar and worked with Nandan for a bit, and then your life story of bringing some of these global brands to India that we today, TripAdvisor is like, oh, you were part of you were actually one of those guys that knew TripAdvisor that early. I mean, how many people can actually say that, right? Match.com, right? So to have that perspective, to have that journey, to be able to really inspire the people who are listening, whether you're a founder or a funder, that it's not a 2-year journey. This is a 25, 30, 40, 50-year journey that even at 20 years feels like a startup, right? And I thank you so much for sharing so candidly. Thank you so much for spending the inordinate amount of time that we have. But
it just went. I think you make it very easy to have this conversation, because I think like also your perspectives on it are what makes the conversation work well. And I think it's been great to learn about your journey, and I think next time we got to flip the role, and I'm going to ask you all the questions.
I felt in the middle that I was the one who was being. So this is the first time anyone's ever done that in 70 episodes. Like, wait a minute, am I talking about my journey or of his? But thank you so much once again, Sandeep. Is there any final thoughts before we close for today?
No, I think you've captured it well in terms of. I do think that this idea that the you don't know what's going to happen next, and being comfortable with that, I think, is the biggest thing. And I think that if whoever, as entrepreneurs, listen to it, can embrace that and go with it, I think we're going to see some really cool businesses come from that.
Sounds good. Thank you so much once again, Sandeep. Looking forward to having you back for another episode.
20 years from now.
20 years from now.
When I have something more to say.